to consider from a previous meeting and a couple of council member motions at committee. But of course, before we start our work together, we always take a moment to contemplate and express our gratitude for the privilege of being here in these seats and being able to do our work here on the territories of the Lekwungen people, and to recognize the Songhees and Kosapsum nations for the work that they have done over so many decades and centuries, ensuring that these lands and the waters that surround them are the wonderful place to live and work that they are. And we like to acknowledge the fact that we understand a little bit anyway about how much work that has taken and how many generations of effort and planning and work together that they have undertaken on our behalf. When we do that, we like to try and express our gratitude, not just in the words that we use every day, but in some of the language that the nations are beginning to teach us with their generosity and sharing. And that is to say, Haichkasiem Nekwilia. And that is to recognize not just their leadership and their stewardship, but the leadership of all of the community members here and throughout the city and all of the territories in which the city sits. And being able to say thank you for all that you are doing and continue to do, recognizing the past, understanding the present, and hopefully looking forward to consider the needs of the future. Haichkasiem Nekwilia. I will just add that in the time that I was away, I had an opportunity to visit some of the other nations in the United States. And it is such a remarkable and different world in seeing the application of the emergence of the resilience of indigenous nations in both countries. Whereas they share so much, they are indeed so different. And I think it is sometimes interesting to compare and reflect on the fact that the two countries have dealt with their indigenous people so profoundly differently. We can learn very much from one another. Moving on to the introduction of late items, there is actually one late item which I would like to propose for the agenda, and that is to add a very brief closed item that will appear between items G2 and G3. So I would so move that the agenda be amended to include, I guess, what would be a G2A, or Mr. Kingsley, how would you like to number those? I think a G2A would be sufficient, and that would be, just as I say, a very brief closed item. So I would move that amendment. Is there a seconder for that, please? Thanks, Councillor Coleman. Are there any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment? Very good, thank you for that. That is unanimous. And therefore, that moves us on to the agenda as amended. And so as noted, there would be one additional brief item as a closed item between G2 and G3. And with that, then, someone would like to move the amended agenda. Thanks, Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Kim. Any questions on the amended agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to the consent agenda, the proposals were for E1, the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting on December the 5th. I would also like to propose the addition of G1, the council member motion advancing climate resilient communities, to be added to the consent agenda. With those two items, would anyone like to add or remove anything in particular from the consent agenda? Seeing none, would someone like to move the consent agenda? Thanks, Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Cardona. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That is unanimous with those two items. Thank you very much. That would move us on usually to the consideration of the minutes, but those were added to the consent agenda, so we'll deal with those at the next available moment at a regular council meeting. That brings us to notices of motion, none of which I am aware are forthcoming today at committee. So that takes us on to new business, and that would usually take us on to G1, the council member motion advancing climate resilient communities, but that was also placed on the consent agenda. So that will be again forthcoming at our next regular council meeting. Actually, just a note, that one does have a time sensitivity to it, so it will be considered when we get to our council meeting for today, as there is a time limit on the utility of that recommendation. So we will come back to that later today. That moves us on to G2. This is another council member motion with regard to $125,000 grant to the, quote, Other Guys Theatre, unquote, to help acquire 716 Johnson Street. I will say this. I did take the time, and welcome, Ms. Reddington. I did take the time to review last week's discussion on this matter while I was away, and took a fair amount of time to contemplate whether or not this motion was in fact in order. And so after reviewing last week's discussion and the previous discussions and the various staff reports and commentary and minutes that have been associated with this, I have determined that this new motion is materially different than the previous motions, and that I am satisfied that as it contemplates a new proposal and does not duplicate any of staff's previous 5 options, the previously proposed and rejected options that were discussed by council, that this motion is in order and will be allowed to be considered today. It is, as I understand it, an unfettered grant for a specific amount without any conditions. And so again, as I determined that it is materially different from what has previously been considered by council, I am willing to have it moved and seconded and debated today. Someone like to move it, please?
I'm sorry, I have a conflict.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course. Thank you, Councillor Kim. Yes, Councillor Kim has previously recused herself for perception of conflict, and will do so again, I understand. Thank you for that reminder. Very good. And so, would someone like to move this motion? Councillor Dell is moving. Anybody like to second it? Councillor Cardona is seconding. All right, Councillor Dell, over to you.
Sure. So I brought back this motion, which I believe is substantially different than what we discussed last week. I know where we landed last week in deciding not to give a conditioned $250,000 grant. I think my rationale for bringing this back is that I got to read that there was enough support around the council table to help support a theater downtown and help support the Other Guys Theater. What we differed on was how to do that and how much to do that and what type of conditions were associated with that. There was clearly a little bit of discomfort at giving them a grant of $250,000 given our financial considerations. And so I'm proposing cutting that in half, $125,000, which is a drastic reduction. Making sure that funding, $125,000, is matched by community donations so that we get back up to that $250,000, but the city's only providing half of that. So, I mean, I think for me, what I heard from residents over the last couple of weeks was overwhelming support for supporting this project. This is probably one of the most emails that we've ever gotten on an issue in the city. I'm counting 150 and more emails from people, from business leaders, from the arts community, from residents, from people outside the city saying that this is why they come down into the city of Victoria. So I'm convinced that supporting Other Guys is still a really smart thing for us to do. We, around this council table, have made downtown revitalization a key priority. There's a lot of ways that we wanted to revitalize downtown. One of that is chipping in and helping out. Renovate old buildings. We started a facade improvement grant this year. It's $100,000 where we help business owners and the DVBA improve the front of their businesses. That's one thing we've done. This is another thing. It's helping a not-for-profit acquire a community space that's going to bring thousands of people to the downtown core. I'm just going to rehash a couple of things just if there's new people in the audience or new people listening. Victoria has lost a lot of arts venues in the last number of years. We have lost some of our most busy and beloved arts venues, whether it be Logan's Pub, the Cotw Pub, and different theater venues and whatnot. And these are getting priced out of the city. Private operators can't really operate in the city of Victoria anymore. It's just not affordable to run an arts venue. So we are going to be relying on not-for-profits, and doing this as a not-for-profit is hard. Mostly it's the labor of love by people volunteering, by people scraping together, by having volunteers painting the building themselves and whatnot. And I think local governments have a responsibility to chip in and make sure that we keep these venues downtown. So as council, we created a new grant a couple of years ago, the $540,000, a major community initiatives and events grant. And that grant, in my mind, I was the one who put it forward, or partially put it forward, was to support generational investments in the downtown. It was support one-off events, for sure, but it was also to support events or renovations and buildings that would have a generational legacy that might be around for 50 or 100 years. So this was the purpose of the grant. We gave out a similar grant to the Victoria Conservatory of Music for, I think, $125,000 to build their fence and build a plaza there. And so I think that's a wonderful investment, but this similarly is going to create a space where we have a beloved dance studio on the second floor with the Reno Dance Studio. And down below, eventually, we'll have 2 arts venues that are going to be a home to multiple smaller arts groups. So this does put a little bit of pressure on the other guy's theater to look for matching donors. That's in a way, the condition here, that I'm not proposing the city have conditions, but that this gives some incentive to the community to also chip in, whether that be 10 or 20 or $100, or maybe somebody can give a whole 125, I don't know. I've left that up to staff, so it's matched by community donations to be confirmed by city staff. I don't know exactly what that will look like. Might look like donor money being put in trust so that we can see that it's there. But yeah, this is just, I guess, to close my attempt to try to find a balance for council, some of us who are maybe not feeling super supportive of this or not comfortable with the higher amount, but also believe that supporting arts and culture and supporting downtown revitalization. Just maybe to close, and I've said this before, I think this money, 125, will come back to us in parking revenue alone. This is going to bring thousands of people to our downtown. There's a parkade, a city parkade right beside it. We get every dollar from that parkade. So we are going to get this money back. Local restaurants are going to get this money back. Local people being employed by this theater are going to get this money back. Corporations know that you spend money and you're going to make a lot more money down the road. And I think it's very clear. You put a little bit of investment in downtown, that money is going to come back to you. If we don't invest in downtown, why would anyone else invest in downtown? So I'm hopeful of this, find a balance that council can support today, and it'll be a big win for the arts community, and I recognize many of them are here today, so thank you for that. And that's my rationale for bringing this forward, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Caradona is the seconder.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't have anything to add. Everything I could possibly say about this file was said last week, so nothing further from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, that is true. Having watched every moment from afar, it was indeed true. Anyone else? All right. First, we'll go to Councillor Loughton and then to Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions from staff, if that's okay. I'm just curious, what civic assets are available for the local performing arts use? So, like, for example, the McPherson or Crystal Garden or community centers. Is there any way that we can support the arts community by making these spaces available at an affordable rate?
Through the mayor, I do know for the McPherson, there was a CRD board motion to look at the service agreement, so there is an opportunity for sure. Definitely that's one of the most important aspects from the city's perspective, is to increase community use of that civic asset. It's one of the, $750,000 a year towards the McPherson, and again, additional funding for the Royal Theatre. So definitely there's an opportunity there that we would like to pursue. With other civic assets, things like the Crystal Gardens, a little bit more complicated, but definitely staff have to be looking for innovative solutions. We have to be looking under every possible opportunity in terms of how can we maximize these civic and community assets to benefit community, and especially in arts and culture. And so, yeah, definitely with community centers, I do think there's opportunities there that we could look at, and look for every opportunity, as we do have a bit of a crisis in terms of affordable and accessible arts and cultural spaces in the city.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that. I need a reminder of how much debt is left to pay on the building, and then just confirmation again that for the renovations it's $1.5 million to $2 million.
Ms. Reddington?
Yeah, through the mayor. So there is one mortgage at $500,000 that they have paid off $250,000 of that with a BC Arts Council grant. And then there's the other mortgage at $1.3 million. And they've paid $3 million off of that one. So so there's $1 million outstanding, and they have the $400,000 from the Thrive Impact Fund that has been confirmed. And that's the only confirmed amount to date. So there is another $600,000, and they do have an application into the Metcalf Foundation that is still has not been confirmed to date.
Okay.
They're still, I think they're in the short list for that opportunity. And in terms of the second part of your question, they believe it's $1.5 to $2 million for the renovation, and there's 3 grant applications currently that have been filed by Other Guys Society. So that's the BC Lottery Corporation, the BC Arts Council, and a federal green initiative, a green infrastructure grant, I believe.
Okay. Okay, and then there was information about someone who wanted to match. Was there confirmation through a third party that?
Yeah, through the mayor, we did receive an email this morning from the other guy's theater. I haven't been able to verify it, but there is a lawyer that has reached out to us but we haven't received a letter from the donor, but it looks like just because of the timing of this meeting, they were not able to provide any documentation. So I haven't been able to verify this email in terms of what's been received to the city to date.
Okay.
I just received it this morning at 8:30.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that.
All right. Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Gardner.
Thanks, Mayor, and through you, thanks very much for your ongoing work and coming back. Just wondering about your understanding of the wording of Section A there, Paragraph A, on the condition that the city's funding is matched by community donations or private donors to be confirmed by city staff. Would you take it that would mean that the donations have to be in the bank before the city money is released, or would you take that to be, I heard that they're likely to donate, so we'll release our money?
Ms. Reddington?
Through the mayor, to be honest with you, it's a difficult question to answer. I would have to almost defer to how we would actually do that in terms of to Councillor Dell's point. Would we hold things in trust? How would we verify that these are matching donations to the city? So I'm not actually sure how we would do that from an administrative process.
Ms. Thompson?
Through the mayor, so what we have done in different circumstances, we have sometimes relied on formal letters confirming the contribution. Of course, that is typically when we're dealing with other granting organizations and provincial, federal governments, those types of things, where we can then count on that letter that the funding is forthcoming. When it is more of a grassroots type of fundraising, I would probably suggest that if we need to make sure that the funding is there, we would have to see the actual cash in the bank.
Great, thanks. That's my only question. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Now me. Okay. There's no question the other guys is a group with a great vision, but short on financing. To date, the organization and this project, through this project, has received a $100,000 grant from the City of Victoria, a property tax exemption for 2 years, amounting to a gift of about $66,000, and in total, 166 of city funding, of taxpayer funding. This additional unsecured grant of $125,000 would result in $290,000 for the startup of a single organization. The motion before us, the background, also identifies the purpose as being about the mortgage, assisting with the mortgage. Funding for this group has been considered several times over the past several months. What did we hear? We heard about a high level of risk, and maybe the city could become a third mortgagee. That's not what's being discussed today. However, it's still about the mortgage. The attitude that struck me, that was voiced once, was, we have the money now, so we should use it. This is not councillors' money. It's a taxpayer money for which we are responsible. It is critical, in my view, that we protect the interests of taxpayers by minimizing risk for the city, and the motion before us removes protections except for someone else has got to kick in to match it. The city, our taxpayers, can't be asked to provide taxpayer funding, I believe, for venues which owe over $1 million to a former benefactor. The use of a major grant program for acquisition funding of purchase of an entertainment venue, I don't believe, is an appropriate use of a fund which started out as a major event fund. Look at what has happened to many businesses downtown. That has been mentioned over the past few years. Most businesses downtown are having financial difficulties. Well, we have seen the closure of some entertainment venues. We've also seen the opening of some venues. The city is not a bank for everybody. It isn't. And nor for those who are special friends or want special favors, to use the mayor's word of favors. The city is not responsible, nor should accept financial responsibility for creating retail, commercial, or not-for-profit facilities. Months ago, staff advised council stating declining the grant request would be in alignment with the city's overreaching city grant policy, which defines purchases, deficits, or debt repayment as ineligible. And that's what this mortgage that's being referred to is. So the $250 or $1,000 request was declined last week. I see this motion for $125,000 as a workaround, one that does not reflect well on this city. So I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Councillor Coleman, go ahead.
Thank you. I too watched the broadcast of the meeting last week. There's 2 hours and 9 minutes of my life I'll never get back. It is fascinating. We've worked trying to figure this one out, and I will offer two different perspectives that I have on this issue. First, we were asked for a $250,000 grant with a very clear timeline. If you don't come up with this, this is the first time the application to us, we will lose the building. And we prevaricated, we put it off, and they said, okay, well, we've gone to the applicant or the owner, and they've extended it to the next time we will deliberate on it. And again, we moved it forward, and they said, okay, well, we've still got a willing partner not to foreclose on us and have the sale. Therefore, last week was the last time we could deal with it. We then got a letter saying, okay, well, if the owner wanted to do this, it would take a number of months to make that work. That doesn't breed great trust in me. At the same time, I recognize that this is an application that the goal for this is something we actually do need in our downtown core. And I put those two together and I go, how do I find a way forward with this? I think we've tried very hard. I know there's people for it and people against it. And while we've got a lot of emails from people saying that we need to do this, we've also got some saying we don't. This is not appropriate. I try and find a balance in most things. I don't support the $125,000 grant, but I do think that it would be better and cleaner if we just did a $100,000 grant outright. Don't tie it to the purchase of the thing, but just say, if I will make that as an amendment that we move this to a $100,000 grant without any conditions. If there is a seconder, I will explain why.
Is there a seconder for that? Oh, I'll second it for discussion. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that this is something, it doesn't solve all the problems that the other guys have in play here. They have to raise more money. But I do think that we have previously given $100,000, and while we have given two permissive tax exemptions that add up to about $66,000, the city contribution in that would be about $40,000. So if we were to add $100,000 now, we'd be at $240,000 all in. And there are some examples that were brought up earlier about questions about other places that we could make community sites for the arts. Most of them have a rack rate that is unattainable for small companies. So when we talk about the McPherson and the Royal, they can't afford to get into those places. So it's the smaller community events, and we don't have a mid-size one that actually works that we need. One of the problems, and it was mentioned earlier that we've got a number of organizations that we've lost, because the economics of the art community and performance art is really difficult. It is really hard to make that economic statement work over the long time. So we've tried a number of different applications for this. I think this is just a clean way for us to support them. And I will say, I hope that there aren't applications for future permissive tax exemptions, because that just becomes an ongoing grant system, and I have a problem with that. But I think that this may be a way out for the Gordian knot that we've created. And it was mentioned before in the last meeting that there are no bad people in this. We're trying to find something that can work and allow everybody to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have nothing to add to that. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Moving from 125 to 100? Go ahead, Councillor Dell.
I guess I'll just say I'll support this, mostly because it sounds like it's going to get Councillor Coleman on board, and I think that's a important way to find some balance here. Like, we're all struggling with this, and if that's what makes some of us feel comfortable while supporting the theater, then I think that's I'll be swayed a little bit, and we'll support this.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Loughton.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I think it makes a lot more sense for it not to be tied to, it does make it cleaner, and because that other offer is not verified, it does make a lot more sense to leave it at this so that we can finish with this today. So I would support the amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coleman.
Sorry, my amendment, I just now looked on the screen, was to take out the conditions as well. So on the condition, that would also be struck.
My apologies. I thought it was just the amount. There you go. Okay. So just looking at that clarification, Councillor Dell, do you have anything further to add? That wasn't in... Okay. And Councillor Loughton, you're satisfied with that? Yes, very good. Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Thompson.
I just have a question of how this makes things better. To me, if we're not matching it, it means we're bringing there's less money flowing into the theater. We'd think that our goal would be to leverage more money to flow into the theater. I'm not sure if the mover or seconder, they don't have to address that, obviously, but...
Councillor Coleman?
Thank you. I think the problem that we faced was we created this conundrum of how we would tie everybody else in, how we would try and get first preference when it was a $250,000 grant over the other people registered on title. None of those are going to work. If we want to support this group, then we should support it. I wouldn't go above $100,000. They're going to have to still raise the rest of the cash. That doesn't change. This just cleans up our contribution.
Councillor Thompson. That's it. Councillor Loughton.
Through you, Mayor, I'll just add that this in no way excludes the other party from matching the $100,000. It just takes the condition away from us. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Councillor Gardner.
I can recall how we went through something with the event center where we gave a grant that really wasn't realized as it did not get spent on how it was because it went under. So what I'm concerned about here is this would be $100,000 with no accountability. In other words, if it doesn't proceed, we don't get it back. This is $100,000 that would be gone, period. Is that right?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So whether it succeeds or not succeeding in getting the rest of the funding, the city, the taxpayer, will have contributed another $100,000 to what has been described as a need for a mortgage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Hammond, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. My concern is how easy it is to throw around dollar figures like this. And $100,000 is a lot of money. It's not a lot of money when you have a budget of over $300 million and we have all kinds of other capital debt. And it is not to take away from the project that is proposed to be going ahead. The difficulty I have is that we started a larger amount that we're told it'll go under, and then we get down to smaller amounts and we're told, okay, if we don't get this, it'll go under. And if there are, in fact, people who are willing to match this, because there's been times for myself personally where Jack and I, we have no difficulty for certain causes in giving money, especially when it's matched. And as a matter of fact, it's an incentive for us to give, I don't mind saying, a lot of money for certain things. And for those things that are important to us, we give. And clearly there are people like the initial benefactor who tragically, but for personal circumstances, would continue to have the $1.3 million. There's a lot of people out there who see the importance of this in the same way that I do. And I'm pretty sure that all of us do in one way or another. The difficulty is that when we start with whatever was the amount, and then it's $250,000, then it's $125,000, and then it's $100,000, it's still a lot of money, and it's still the taxpayers' money. And I believe that this is a very worthwhile cause, and I also believe that the community, through a number of different people, can actually come forward. But just like Councillor Gardner indicated, this has no strings attached whatsoever, and our concerns were last week that if we were the third mortgagee, would we get any money back? And that was a concern, at least for some of us. And then so in this case, we're not anywhere in the lineup, because if something goes wrong, let's say they have to sell or they lose the money, the taxpayer, not our money, the taxpayer is out of this money. And so it's regrettable, because I like the idea of being able to fund all kinds of organizations, but it's not my money. And as a result of that, just because as a whole, and especially what we discussed and debated last week, is that I'm afraid that I just can't be supporting this or the original one, because it's still an enormous amount of money. But I would encourage the applicant to be spending that time and effort on going out and finding whether levels of government, which I know they're trying to, and also through other agencies and organizations and beneficial organizations, benefactor organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just reflecting on the comments of my colleagues, I'm leaning in favor of this now. We did tie ourselves in knots back in August 1st, and that was because the project was clearly, if you're counting votes, going to be rejected at that time. And so we, I think unanimously, went forward with some sort of direction to get financial assurance, and that kept the project alive, and that was my intent in moving that motion, was to keep the project alive. So in the spirit of keeping this moving forward, I agree with my colleague, Councillor Dell, that if this brings Councillor Coleman on side, I'm in favor of it. Just in terms of the scale of this grant, I do want to point out that when this originally came to us on August 1st, it came with 4 other proposals. And the amounts of those proposals were $131,000, $250,000, $250,000, and $200,000, and we approved those unanimously. So I don't think that this is out of scale for what this council did approve unanimously, and I'm happy to see this amendment go ahead so that the overall motion can go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? I am going to support the amendment for many of the reasons that have already been stated, so I won't repeat them. But I do appreciate the mover of this amendment in the sense that it brings some simplicity to what has been an extraordinarily convoluted conversation. I do not think that it takes away from the expectation that there will be a significant amount of fundraising done by the theatre company, whether it's 100 or 125. There is, I believe, significant support. So providing a $100,000 grant unfettered with no expectation of anything other than a demonstration of our commitment to the theatre community, I think is sufficient. So I will be supporting the amendment. Seeing no one else, all those in favor of the amendment? That would be Councillor Loughton, Councillor Thompson, myself, Councillor Cardona, Councillor Coleman, and Councillor Dell. In opposition, Councillor Hammond and Councillor Gardner. So the amendment is adopted. And so staff, if you could just clean that up, we'll have a look at the actual amended motion. And now back on the main motion as amended. Any further comments? Councillor Loughton. And then Councillor Gardner.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I know this is a bit odd. I supported the amendment, but my position hasn't changed on this since last week. I'm I do have quite a, I'm going to just, I do have quite a bit to say here on this, and I'm sorry for that, but I think it's important, and I'll take my time to do it. There is, just to one of the other comments that happened here, I do think this is out of scale with what we've previously approved for this grant, and the reason is that the other projects are guaranteed to happen. They have a secure financial plan. This one does not. For me, this isn't about the amount requested, and I need to expand on my position for that, because last week one of my colleagues accused me of not supporting the arts community, and council also received an email from the applicant that said, quote, "I expect there might be a lot of disappointed art supporters out there. Please reach out to me if you get feedback from our community that is in any way abusive or beyond critical. I will step in and request civility if needed." Now, I didn't receive any, not a text, not an email. There was no criticism whatsoever. Yet, because of these two things, I want to clarify my position on arts and culture for the community. I am an avid supporter of the arts. This is not what this situation is about for me. The importance of the arts is huge for society. It provides a creative outlet for expressing emotions, storytelling, and conveying ideas. It also helps to foster critical thinking and promote cultural understanding. It is also a way to express injustice, and that's how I have used it in the films that I have made. It makes the world colorful and beautiful, and it's fun. It's what makes communities vibrant and interesting, and it's critical to society. I worked at an artist-run co-op here in Victoria for 8 years. I have also produced 2 documentary films, and I know how difficult fundraising is and how tenacious and dogged one must be to get a financial plan in place that works. Grants for arts are more competitive these days, and that's what makes business models more difficult than ever. And we are in tough times. But despite this, in 2024, Victoria funded the following programs. Almost $4 million to purchase Herman's Jazz Club for music and performing arts. Financial pressures were eased for 15 arts and culture venues, one of which is this application, with almost $750,000 in property tax exemptions. Victoria spent $270 million supporting 4 cultural venues, the Arts Hub at 780 Blanchard Street, Paul Phillips Hall at the Fernwood Community Association, Theatre Scam, and the Victoria Event Centre, ensuring these spaces continued to thrive, although sadly the VEC closed its doors regardless of the grant. Victoria has spent almost $1 million investing in the Royal Theatre and the McPherson Playhouse to sustain operations and fund essential capital improvements. And as a caveat here, I think the McPherson needs to be open for mid-sized theater companies at an affordable rate, and we should continue working on that. Victoria distributed $2.1 million in grants, helping over 70 not-for-profit organizations bring ideas to life. $450,000 promoted 46 festivals, drawing big crowds and unlocking $8.4 million in outside funding. $150,000 supported music spaces and 9 nonprofits as part of the Victoria Music Strategy, and $250,000 went to upgrading 15 venues, making them more accessible for the community. And this is not an exhaustive list. Victoria punches above its weight in arts funding, and I supported all of this. This grant is an isolated case for me. Last week, I had 2 main reasons for opposing. Debt repayment does not fall under the city's overarching grant policy guidelines and the double-digit tax lift we're facing. Council needs to determine its wants and needs and be pragmatic with the public's money and sensitive to competing budget priorities, taking the whole community into budget considerations, including the budget survey results, which listed housing and community safety as the top 2 priorities. This week, the main reason I can't support this grant is that I'm not convinced that this money will make the project come to fruition. Last week, I thought that if Council did not support the grant, this project would be finished. And I agonized over this. I've spent a lot of time on this. and I agonized thinking that the grant was the linchpin for success. and that the commercial tenant would lose its fantastic space. I voted against it, but it was agonizing. However, now I know that the venue will open in March, albeit bare bones, and that was always the plan. What's happening right now is not how grants should be determined. This grant needs guidelines, and awards must be decided by staff. My colleague, we're not supposed to say each other's names, the one across the table there, mentioned this at the time council made the decision to handle things this way. This was a light touch by staff and with council making the final decision. And now that we see this in context, it's clear to me why this is not how things should be done. I think it's terrible governance. Awarding this grant does not guarantee the Arts Hub, nor is opening the venue dependent on this money. Similarly to last week, my rationale is that it is too much risk to take with public money during an incredibly difficult economic time, particularly on a project that does not have a secure financial plan and a grant request that does not follow city policy. I apologize to the applicant. I know how hard this is. I've been here. Maybe not to quite the extent, but I've put passion over reason and done things that I probably shouldn't have if I was business-minded. Us and Them, my first film I made, wouldn't exist. So I get it. And I'm sorry for the disappointment, but if this does pass, of course, I support the will of council, and we'll all move forward. And I hope that a solution to secure the remaining funds will happen for the applicant. I also hope that I never have to make a decision like this again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Dell.
Thank you. And I will mention a name. Thank you very much, Councillor Loughton, for giving us the whole background of the amounts that the city has forwarded in the last couple of years. I really appreciate that because it makes a very strong statement. I also had communications back and forth with a few of the people who were urging this council to approve any funding for this project. And I chose to communicate with people who don't live in the city. I said, how much is your community contributing to performance space? And the question shocked a couple of them. It really did. They said, I think I better think about that. And that is indeed the case. Victoria cannot bear so much for the whole region. At the same time, yes, we are the center of the region. And therefore, we have the major theaters in the area, no question. And we have other venues. And that's very important. And I think we have to recognize that. The city of Victoria, and I think everyone, most people that live here, not everyone, of course, really appreciates the arts. I personally do. My kids thought I was a monster growing up. They didn't have a color TV, but they did have music lessons. And myself, I knew I had to make a living, so although I was doing a double major in fine art and in chemistry, I had to choose chemistry. And I really appreciate the arts, and I support them in my own way, as I think most people do. Again, what really worries me about this whole thing, and this grant, or this motion before us now, is it's a workaround. It's simply a workaround. Very, very bad governance. So I cannot support this council member motion. It is a workaround, and I think it just is not befitting us to play these games. This is not our money. Personally, it is not our council's money. It's taxpayer money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dell.
Sure, I just wanted to make two additional points. I'm obviously going to vote in favor of this. Part of my professional career, I worked at the Community Gaming Grant Branch, and we give out $140 million per year to not-for-profits and a $5 million major capital grant. I got to draft those guidelines, and I got to administer those grants. Across BC, every single not-for-profit, healthcare, social services, arts and culture, this is exactly how they all operate. They cobble together volunteer effort, community donations, grants. They have multiple grants up in the air. This is how it works. And if you say this is just too risky, then you might as well just I mean, disregard the entire not-for-profit sector in British Columbia, because this is how they operate. It is always on the line. It is always a super passionate group of people doing everything possible, and as a result of that, we have a lot of wonderful social services. I mean, look at Our Place Society, as that kind of grew out of Alan Tysick's work. They never had all the money for their buildings. They cobbled it together over years and years and years. And to say, yeah, it's too risky, we're not going to do it, we wouldn't have any of that stuff. So this is pretty typical on how not-for-profits work. One of the best things a not-for-profit can have is have a government step in and say, you know what, we're going to show the public we believe in you. We're going to put some money in, and then that's where those community donations, the other grants start to come from. So I think for this $100,000, we're going to give a lot of confidence to this organization, confidence to donors, confidence to other granting organizations, which we know are out there. We're talking about downtown revitalization. This year, the Vic PD are asking for $7 million increase. $7 million, and a lot of that is to help downtown. This is a 1% of the Vic PD increase this year, 1% to help downtown. So I kind of find it a little ironic that I know many of us might just support that $7 million without question, and asking for 1% of this to create a vibrant hub that's going to bring people downtown, bring economic is deemed a waste of taxpayer money. This is part of the investment. Yeah, we invest in Vic PD, we invest in bylaw, we invest in things like this. This is a tiny, tiny fraction of what we're going to be offering for community safety. So I just want to bring that in context. But other than that, I think all of us have struggled with this, and I recognize that, and I know it's been hard on some of us in different ways. This is obviously not as much as I would like to give them. I think a bigger investment, it would be wise on the city and would be coming back to us, but at the same time, it's important to find compromise here, and I appreciate Councillor Coleman really weighing out the pros and cons, and I think he's probably got something right here, so I will be supporting this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. I said a lot last week about downtown and how downtown is important to the city and also to the region, and how arts and entertainment add vitality, especially which is especially important as we add more housing, especially high-rise housing where people don't have as much access to the outdoors. We need those third spaces. So I won't repeat all that, but I do want to focus on a couple things. I've worked for and run nonprofits, and that, as my colleague says, that is exactly how they work. It is always cobbling together money, whether it's for capital investments, which I've been involved in, or for events, which I've been involved in. And I'm very experienced with events, and they can definitely fail. And I just wanted to reiterate what I said earlier, that when we approved 4 other grants that came in with this one in August 1st, they were all much bigger than this one, up to $250,000, and those were unanimous approvals on things that could fail. When it comes to the risks, I think that this amount is $100,000. It's a serious amount. We know that we're dealing with taxpayer dollars and not our own. That's obvious. I think we need to compare this with other risks that are on our plate right now. If we think about Crystal Pool, $200 million, that's 2,000 times the size of this risk. It's far larger. There's going to be much bigger trade-offs. If approved, Crystal Pool is going to result in major cuts to entire services and programs that the city runs, as opposed to making a dent in a particular program for the next year. So we've already seen council in the budget process giving direction to look for major cuts even without Crystal Pool. So I think that we just need to keep this in context of what $100,000 is. As I said, it's a serious amount of money, but we make decisions on much bigger pieces of money. Just to elaborate on the building versus events thing, a building can provide many events, many small events. If this goes ahead, we will probably see lots of, weekly and daily little events going on that bring vitality to downtown and make it easier to live downtown, and also serve people throughout the city and throughout the region who come to downtown to see these things. I'm really pleased to hear today about all the fundraising work that the applicant has been doing. That gives me the reassurance that this is not just mortgagees putting pressure on an applicant to get money to cover their investments. This looks like it's a real initiative that is going ahead, and I think it's given our existing and past commitments to the arts. I think this is within the right scale for us to be supporting. So I'll be voting in favor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Councillor Coleman.
Lots to be said on this. I particularly appreciate a comment that was made 2 speakers ago saying maybe Councillor Coleman got it right this time. I'd like to hear that more often. I don't expect it, though. These are always going to be difficult discussions. I think there's a myriad of things that we both want and need. We can't afford them all. We have to try and find, as a council, a balance point that lets us move forward with those that we think can be successful. Will they be successful 100% of the time? No. We've seen that with previous grants. But we need to have that ongoing discussion. I will agree with a number of comments that were made earlier about this is a terrible form of governance. To have competing council member motions on an ongoing basis really drives us to distraction and creates this weird fog around this table, and it unfortunately breeds some distrust. So I will give notice now. I'm going to be in Dorval in mid-March, and I'm then being sent to Cambodia, I think, the week following. So if you want to bring up council member motions, do it then, and I don't have to deal with them, okay? On this grant particularly, I think we need to, if you don't like the idea, then vote against the $100,000 and let that be the message to the applicant. But we need to give them some surety as they move forward. Let's get this one off the table. This just cleans it up and doesn't have us trying to figure out which place in a mortgage we might be able to recover funds. All that's done. This is just a grant, and I will support it.
Thank you very much. Ms. Redington, a question for you. Can you remind me the Major Community Events and Initiatives grant? Have we expended all of that so far? Do you recall?
No, through the mayor, this was the $250,000, so we would have $150,000 now left. This was the 2024 application, so there would be $150,000 in the 2024.
Should that not be allocated specifically for the past year? Would it roll into the next year?
Through the mayor. Sorry, I may just defer to Director Thompson.
Ms. Thompson?
Through the mayor, so the council has 2 options here. One, my understanding of the original applications that came in, they were for the 2024 and 2025 year together. Right. So council has actually allocated both years. The 150 is what's remaining out of the 2-year pot, you can call it that. So council could choose to reduce the 2025 budget by if this goes through, the $150,000 or $250,000 if this does not go through, and therefore scale back on the program in 2025. As you may recall, there is a proposal to reduce this program in 2026. So, but yes, those are the sort of the 2 options. I know that Ms. Redington mentioned the 2024. We've sort of bundled them together between the 2 years, so I see this more as a 2025 allocation.
Thank you for that clarification. And so should this be adopted, we could have the option as we look forward in the budget for 2025 to, in fact, reduce that budget by $150,000. Okay, thanks for that. I find this utterly perplexing. I'm a bit surprised that it's taken us that long to get to this apparently simple resolution, if in fact it is adopted. I am going to support this for a different reason, I think, than has been expressed. There is no doubt at all that Council's past and current deliberations on the budget are extraordinarily difficult, as they are for every municipality these days. That being said, we have allocated a significant amount of money to a variety of different arts organizations, events, activities over the last number of years, as has been recited by a number of council members. And I think that should we begin to start looking at a different approach insofar as wondering out loud and through the budgetary positions of whether municipalities have a role, a continuing role in funding arts organizations, then that is the time to have that difficult discussion about how much, to whom, and when. I do not believe that we are there yet. Perhaps I am wrong. That being said, right now, it is my belief that council and the community still believe that there is a role for municipalities to support local arts organizations. And I think this fits that priority. I am actually quite pleased that this has been reduced to $100,000. I think that is much more reasonable from the perspective of demonstrating a commitment to not just this organization, but to the arts community in general. And I hope is a way for the public to be encouraged to not just match this amount, but to actually go beyond this amount to provide the support needed to ensure that this is a viable option. I don't think that it would be prudent for us to go beyond this, given the amount of money that's already been allocated in various ways towards this particular project. But I do believe that this will be significant enough to ensure that the project proceeds and succeeds. So I will, in fact, be supporting this motion as amended. Anyone else? Seeing none, all those in favor? Councillor Thompson, myself, Councillor Caradona, Councillor Coleman, and Councillor Dell. In opposition, Councillor Hammond, Councillor Hammond, yes, Councillor Loughton, and Councillor Gardner. So that is adopted. That takes us on then to the next item of business, and as mentioned earlier when we adopted the agenda, we've added a closed item to our agenda at this point, and so just for the information of the public, we will briefly move into a closed session and then return for the balance of the open agenda. Just take a moment to allow staff to move us into closed, and then we'll resume. Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Gardner. All those in favor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is adopted. Thank you very much. And so, thank you very much to the public for your patience in allowing us to have a brief conversation. And in fact, we are going to do a bit of procedural gymnastics to accommodate a number of important pieces of information relevant to our following last piece on our committee agenda. And so what I'm in fact going to do right now is I am going to recess Committee of the Whole, and I'm going to move us into the daytime council meeting. And once we do that, then I will adjust the agenda for the daytime council meeting. And so we'll be doing it in two parts, so we can return to our committee meeting to deal with the balance of our committee agenda. So right now, I don't need a motion to recess, but just for the minutes, I will actually move a motion to recess. Thanks, Councillor Coleman, for seconding that. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Very good, thank you. So we're recessing Committee of the Whole. Mr. Kingsley, do we need a moment to do anything technical before we move into council?
We could use 1 to 2 minutes, Mayor.
Sure, very good. All right, we'll take that. Just give us a signal when you're ready to go. Thank you for your patience as we jumped back and forth from open to closed. I will just note for the public that one of the reasons that we went into closed is to deal with the rise and report, which is relevant to the upcoming council member motion, and we wanted to ensure that there was an opportunity for council and the public to have all of the information pertinent to this particular item. So that is, in fact, item G3. This is a council member motion with regard to balanced information for the Crystal Pool referendum. And I'm going to go to Councillor Hammond to move it.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Gardner seconding. Over to you, Councillor Hammond.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to start with asking staff a couple questions through you. At the moment, the city subsidizes the Crystal Pool for $2.7 million. Do we know how much the operating costs of this new pool proposal will add to the city's net cost?
Mr. Newman, is that something that you could answer?
Yes, through you, Mayor Alto. In 2017, the feasibility study considered the impacts associated with the operating costs. The study identified that the increased usage would translate to operating revenue increases in the order of 35 to 38% annually, and that operating expenditures would increase in the order of 25 to 50% to support the increased size of the new facility. There's still too many undetermined factors to accurately predict the operating costs, such as key design elements, energy requirements, program schedules, and revenue projections. However, to provide council with a high-level concept of the operating costs, our preliminary estimates suggest that costs could rise roughly $1.3 to $2 million annually. However, revenue streams such as updated programming fees, sponsorship opportunities, and potential parking revenues will help offset these costs once the new facility opens in 2030.
And through you, Mayor, then the $1.3 to $2 million is not necessarily net cost to the city?
That would be a rough figure for net cost.
Okay.
But that doesn't anticipate recalculation of any new programs or services that the new facility could offer with its expanded spaces as well as the other revenue streams that I mentioned.
And through you, Mayor, is there any guesses on those?
At this time, Mayor, through the Mayor, I don't have those figures at my fingertips. Again, all of these figures are very preliminary at this point.
Thanks very much. If I could also ask, Mayor, in the city literature, it notes the typical business property assessment is $733,000. I was wondering if someone could explain what size of business is that?
Ms. Thompson?
Through the mayor, so what we use there is we call it a typical business, which is intended to reflect a small sort of independent business downtown, sort of Lower Johnson. The business class has a very broad range of businesses, including the large hotels and then down to the very, very small businesses as well. So what we try to focus on is that sort of small independent business in sort of Lower Johnson, Upper Fort type of area. So the $733,000 assessed value is what's reflecting that.
Thanks. And Mayor, if I could ask, while I was given, I thought by the finance department, a typical business would be about $660 a year extra for the 20 years. Is that number still somewhat correct? Because I see a few different numbers.
Through the mayor, so that is the number from the report that staff brought in June. It was before council allocated additional funding from the parking reserve. I believe the current number or the updated number taking that into account is $620 for a typical business.
Okay, thanks. And another question is, what is the budget for advertising for the project?
Through the mayor, there's two separate streams for the information on this. So there's the project information stream, and then there's a get out the vote for the project information. $70,000, which includes labor and material costs for the information kiosks in 3 different locations across the city. Those were built in-house by city staff, and certainly my thanks to our in-house staff that created those, because they're very well done. And that also started in October versus the Get Out the Vote campaign, which we waited until we had proper approval from the province and an approved date. So that actually started in December, and the budget for that Get Out the Vote campaign is $45,000. Additionally, the Connect newsletter that is now in every resident's mailbox likely by now. I know I got mine on Monday. That cost was $20,000, including the mailing, which is a significant portion of that. That includes both project information and impacts such as tree loss and tax impacts, as well as where and when to vote.
Thanks. And does that include the budget for legislative services?
Yes, that's everything that goes through for the referendum, get out the vote. All the city's communications go through the Communications and Engagement Department.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. May I make some comments?
Yes, of course.
Great. And I've also asked the staff to bring up some slides of information that I've got. So last Christmas Eve, Jack and I were driving home from a party when we passed a bus shelter at Fort and Douglas. I asked Jack to drive around the block because I wasn't sure what it was, and this was the poster. To my surprise, this is what I saw. There was no reference to a referendum on February the 8th. There was no reference to Victoria voters having a say on this new proposal, just praising the virtues of a more accessible, sustainable, modern, more inclusive, bigger Crystal Pool and Wellness Centre. I was under the impression that this referendum was a decision for the voters of Victoria and the city wasn't going to support the vote one way or another. However, this ad caught my attention as being rather one-sided. Then I think it was on December 29th, I saw a half-page ad in the Times Colonist. And if you can show that. Thanks. This is just a crass picture that I took. But due to the reality in Canada that nothing gets done from work until the new year, I didn't get the chance to bring this up with city staff. I would never try to run anything in our city, and I certainly would never try to act like a police or bylaw of the city by taking matters into my own hands. That's not the way we should be doing things, and we should be operating. However, when I did bring this up, I thought something would change to make sure that we were promoting the referendum without taking a side. But as I found out, anything coming from the legislative services, such as this brochure, the next brochure, please, which came to our house in the mail, and then this was in the Times Colonist newspaper, the next one, please, thank you. It clearly showed that what I thought was the important information for people to get about this referendum. And just the other day, I saw a full-page ad in the Times Colonist, or I think I did, going into great detail about who, what, when, where for the referendum. However, other advertising from the city, including the recent Connect 4-page newsletter, if you can show that, the Connect that was just made reference to, is called a Special Edition Crystal Pool Replacement Project. This pool will be more accessible, sustainable, modern, more inclusive and bigger, but will also be the biggest and most expensive project the city will embark on, at least in present-day dollars. While some information notes how much the average city taxpayer and business will pay for more than 20 years, there is no mention about the $47 million in reserves that we'll need to pay back, which our finance department told me has to be paid back over 15 years. And while we can find other ways of raising that money, it would come to about $4 million a year, which is just, which if we just add to that, the taxpayers will mean about another 2% tax increase to residents for 15 years, or we can cut services. Then there's the operating costs. At the moment, the city subsidizes the pool with $2.7 million, and with a newer and bigger facility, that costs are going to go up. And we just heard from staff, before extra revenues, it could be $1.3 to $2 million, although they're not entirely sure, and I wouldn't want to hold anyone to it. Some Victoria voters are already voting on this issue. Normally, we wouldn't want to change things mid-voting. However, if the public continues to get one-sided information, then there are going to be a lot of people who won't be happy if they didn't get all the facts before even more people voted. If this project goes ahead and in a few years we have people being shell-shocked by their tax bills, I don't want it to be because they didn't have all the facts available to them. And one more thing that the public should at least be told, there are no guarantees that this plan will come in on budget. If it goes ahead, as a councillor and as a taxpayer, I certainly hope it does. However, Victoria voters remember how the Blue Bridge came in 66% over budget. And the city's design consultant, HCMA, Architect and Design, was hired by the city of Burnaby for their recreation centre. It was to come in at $187 million, but when it got to $340 million, or 81% over budget, they fired HCMA, found another firm, and pared down their plans with their recreation centre expected to come in at a cost of $253 million. Yet that's still 35% more than the original budget, and it is now a scaled-down project. I'm not trashing this firm, as anyone can get fired and learn from their mistakes. I remember when I was 19 and I got fired, they said I talked too much, although becoming a professional speaker kind of helped out. But anyway, these original estimates came about in 2020, 2021, prior to the severe inflationary environment that began in early 2022. However, we know that even with our contingency of about 30%, there's no guarantees, especially when we're living in the world of Donald Trump. Who knows what's going to happen with tariffs? If we want to be balanced with the public, we need them to know all of the potential risks, not pie-in-the-sky risks, but reasonable potential risks. In addition to putting a stop to one-sided advertising, perhaps the city could add to our website some typical Q&As, such as a question. If this project doesn't go ahead, will this be the end of the pool in the city of Victoria? And the answer could be no. And then we could put in a quote from our mayor from Sunday's Time Columnist newspaper, where she said a no vote doesn't mean no pool. In response to the event of a no vote, to the chance of a no vote, the mayor said, quote, "I think what it means is we have to figure out another way. I do think we need a rec center and with a pool. The question is this the right one? Or how about this question? Can the existing pool be renovated? Yes." In that same Sunday Times Columnist article, they wrote, quote, Thomas Soulier, Victoria's deputy city manager, said council decided in 2017 that a new facility made more sense than spending millions on a 1970s facility that needed too much work and too much money to get it to the standards required today for accessibility, energy efficiency, customer service, and overall utilization. Options in 2017 range from about $40 million to renovate it on the existing site to $56 million for renovation and a small expansion. He said, time is of the essence for the facility as, quote, things are failing on a fairly regular basis. Or another one, question, will any trees be affected? The answer could be yes. And then the city could give some information from the arborist report that was recently released. In fact, yesterday, a city resident sent us information and renderings of tree removals and trees at risk. She noted that if there was any of her information that wasn't accurate, she'd be happy to make corrections. So I'm not saying this is gospel. But for our purposes, here are the renderings she sent us for both the south and north pool options. If you could put up the first one, please. Comes after this. There we go. And so she noted that the sort of the pinkish ones were trees that are going to be removed. This is for the south option. And trees at risk are in orange. And then if you could show the next slide, the last slide, it's the north option. Not as many trees, but these trees would be removed, and the ones in sort of orangey are going to be at risk. Hence, the recommendation of both Councillor Gardner and I is as follows. The council directs staff to immediately put a stop to one-sided advertising regarding the referendum. 2, replace upcoming advertising and information sections, such as pop-up locations, as well as the city's website, to include arguments or reasoning for both the yes and no sides of the binding question on the referendum. And 3, have this information vetted by the city manager before changes are made. That this matter be forwarded to the January 23rd, 2025 Council to Follow Committee of the Whole meeting. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner is the seconder.
Thank you. I supported the motion some time ago to have the Crystal Pool replacement project go to referendum so that residents and business property owners could tell the whole city whether or not they supported the borrowing of $169 million for this initiative. The motion before us today is not about support for or against the pool project. It is about communications of the referendum. The proposal is complex, no question about that, and made more complex by, I believe, the questions to be placed on the referendum ballot with the addition of the siting question. I have a comment on neutrality. I had hoped that the city's presentation would be neutral and that councillors would remain neutral so as to not unduly influence public opinion. That changed when 1 or maybe 2 or maybe 3 councillors became involved with community groups voicing opinions on the initiative. While any member of council has the right to speak out in favour of or in opposition to a project which is subject to referendum, the message from the city became muddled as interpretations to the city materials were seen in a different light. And I think that is critical to what we're dealing with today. I've not had a chance to discuss this with my fellow mover of this motion, but I'd like at this time to suggest an amendment or two, if that's appropriate. But first, a question to Mr. Sheldon. Mr. Sheldon, sorry. When are there more pop-ups anticipated with people manning them?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, there are. Through the mayor, there's 3 in addition. I can get you the dates if you require them, but they're on our website for the Crystal Pool website.
What is the next date?
Mr. Newman?
To you, Mayor Alto. The next date for the Crystal Pool pop-up session is on January 23rd. And
today.
It's happening right now, yep, thank you. And then the next one is January 26th at QV Coffee House in Cook Street Village. And then on January 30th, we have an online session.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move a couple of amendments. So the first one involves, I think, to make it clear, both number 1 and 2, and then I'll have another amendment later. The first would be 2. I'm just going to read it to you, and staff perhaps can alter it as they go. Alter the advertising regarding the referendum to reflect more balance.
Excuse me, Councillor Gardner, so are you suggesting a replacement of the existing language?
It could be, that's probably simpler than going word by word. And then the second one, which matches that, is to change the word replace to require.
Okay.
And remove the word upcoming, because I'll have another motion to that later, or another amendment, yes.
Okay.
So I offered those amendments at this time. I believe that covers
okay.
a lot.
I think that makes that's
so I'd ask, first of all, if my co-mover is in agreement.
Mayor, on a point of clarification, we don't know exactly why the upcoming is being removed.
My later amendment will be put in a date of effect.
I suspect there's going to be an introduction of additional sessions.
Just for purposes
okay. May I put in another amendment, then part of this amendment?
Just to make sure that we know what we're doing.
Yes. One moment, please.
Okay.
Councillor Gardner, if in fact you have other reasons to remove the word upcoming, why don't we leave that off for now?
Okay.
And simply have you deal with the changes to the altering requirement, and then subsequently you can do an additional amendment dealing with the upcoming. I think that's, from an order perspective, just a little bit more logical. So you're going to, hang on. You're going to leave in require.
And take out replace.
I think. Yep. But take out the line through upcoming.
I thought you said to leave upcoming in at this point. Yes.
Is that your intention?
Thank you.
Okay. So that's been moved. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hammond is seconding. On the amendment, Councillor Gardner.
I think that this perhaps addresses it a bit more clearly, because from what we've been hearing from the public, there may be 3 or 4 sides to this project, and I think that this perhaps helps to give a better description of what I think we all want, which is for the general public to understand as much as possible about the referendum question.
Okay. Councillor Hammond is a seconder on the amendment only.
It seems sort of clear. If there's one way or another that we can get some appropriate change for more balance, then I'm in favor of this.
Thank you. Councillor Cardona on the amendment.
Thanks, Mayor. I oppose the totality of this motion and the amendments because it's predicated on the false assumption that our staff are not balanced and that they're biased. They're not. So once we're done with these amendments, I will have the opportunity to comprehensively dismantle this motion. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Dell.
I'll just also oppose the amendment and the entire motion. I've reviewed all the information, and found it
Councillor
quite
Dell, I'm
balanced.
going to
So-
interrupt you because at this point we're dealing only with the amendment. You will have an opportunity to speak to the totality of the motion when we finish all of our amendments.
Okay, works for me, thank you.
Okay? Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll oppose the amendment because I think that it leaves point number one so vague that it doesn't actually provide any direction to staff, just like the original wording did. And I do have my own amendment that would clarify things.
Very good, thank you. Just for the information of the table, when we finally conclude with all of our amendments, I am going to ask people to vote on each of 1, 2, and 3 individually. Councillor Coleman, and then Councillor Kim.
A question through you, Your Worship. How many of us have actually attended pop-up sessions?
Right, hands up. Anyone attended a pop-up session?
Well, unmanned.
There's
Some are
your-
unmanned. There's,
Okay,
Right, there
the
you go.
pop-up sessions that we've had so far, I'm just trying to, thank you.
That was it? Councillor Coleman, all right. Anyone else on the, Councillor Kim on the amendment?
Thanks. Sorry, also just flagging, I have to leave in a couple minutes for a different meeting.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But a question for staff. Advertising is not a quick turnaround. You have to submit proofs, set up agreements with the ad agents, all of these things. What is the actual viability of this given the date we have set for the referendum?
Mr. Johnson?
Thanks for the question. Through the mayor, the viability is very low. I would extend that to say we don't actually have any more booked ads. Everything has already been spent and out there, including, transit stuff you buy, like a suite, a package, and so sometimes things are even in the field after an event has even happened because you've purchased that suite of ads. So we don't have actually anything upcoming. We could possibly get an additional ad in a couple of print, but we'd hustle. Yep.
Yeah, and so just confirming, bus shelter ads in particular are, difficult because you'd also have to get the big thing printed, right? Yeah, okay. And then let's say this did pass. Just clarifying what you said, the budget for advertising already ripped through?
Through the mayor, we would access whatever funds we needed to
Okay.
action, council's action, direction.
Okay, anybody else on the amendment? Okay, no one else on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? Councillor Hammond, myself, Councillor Gardner. In opposition? Councillor Lutton, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Kim, Councillor Cardona, Councillor Coleman, and Councillor Dell. The amendment fails. Councillor Gardner, you still have the floor on the main motion not yet amended.
thank you. I will make the other amendment, which I don't expect to be passed, as the motion probably will not be.
Go ahead.
And that would be to change number 3 to number
Say again, sorry?
number, what do they catch up? Okay. Thank you. Just to change number 3 to number 4, and then add on number 3, which would be
Okay.
changes to materials and information be made prior to January 26th, which means before the actual advanced dates. Yeah, to January 26th. Thank you.
Is that it? Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hammond is seconding that. Go ahead, Councillor Gardner.
We need this referendum to be clean, and we need it not to be contested after the fact. The changes I'm suggesting are in order to facilitate that, to try to ensure that this referendum is seen as clean. And that is why I am trying to do this. Now, I realize January 22nd is very tight. However, we've seen now different campaigns seem to be able to make signs up within a day. So I suggest that this would be something that could be done, even if it's in a bit of a patch quilt type of way, and especially on the website by, in the next couple of days. So that's why I had this motion, and with it, that's why I was going to suggest initially that the word in number 2, upcoming, be taken out, but we'll leave that for now. Be simpler just to go with number 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hammond is a seconder for the amendment.
Thanks, Mayor. And as my colleague has indicated, she didn't talk to me about this, but it seems reasonable that if we want to give the public information as quickly as possible, that the sooner we can make these changes, the better off we'll be. So I support that.
Thank you, Councillor Cardona. On the amendment.
I oppose this, Mayor, and I find the timing of all this incredibly fishy, especially since the materials and information was actually endorsed. The direction was endorsed by this council months ago. And I'll have a chance to elaborate on that in detail in a moment.
Thank you very much. On this amendment, anyone else? Councillor Loughton.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I just a question to staff. Is this possible? And would there be a difference between making the changes to print material and digital material?
Mr. Johnson?
We would need additional clarity as to what changes needed to be made. We do have information on our website on the FAQs about what would happen if there is a no vote. Staff don't speculate on what the future will hold, but rather say we would come back to council for direction on that. So we don't speculate on what other facilities could replace it or anything like that. So we do have many pieces of information on the impacts of the choices, either north or south, and we have information on impacts to trees, information on impacts to taxes. All of that stuff is available, but we're very, very careful to not speculate on future impacts, and we tailored all of our communication materials on the information that council received when they made the decision to send this to referendum.
Okay, so just a follow-up to that, hypothetically speaking, if this was to pass, do you know what to do with this information, or would staff have to come back to council for further direction?
Mr. Johnson?
Through the mayor, yeah, I would definitely require additional direction in that, the information that we have in our materials and advertising, like I said, is based on the information that council already received. If there is issue with adjectives, I suppose, we could provide that direction to us now, and we would certainly make sure any future things. But those pop-up kiosks and whatnot, those are built structures, and so that would take some effort to dismantle them if that was required. Additionally, I'll just add for comment. I think we would use similar adjectives if we were to, say, replace a fire hall, and that went to referendum. We would say that it's state-of-the-art, seismically sound, all of those things. And so these are project facts, and we chose to educate the public as much as possible on what they were choosing and when and where to vote.
Okay, thanks for that.
That's it. Anyone else on this amendment? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Excuse me. I don't support this, and the reason is I have a fair understanding of what staff have done and how I've gone to 4 of the pop-ups so far. To ask them to change the information and the materials now is, one, unfair to staff. It's also unfair to the publics that they've dealt with. And the reason is going to require a little bit of explanation. I've watched staff deal incredibly effectively in what I think, my perception, is a neutral forum where people come in and ask questions, and if you follow the 6 pop-up signs that they have at the pop-up events and the very large binder with FAQs, they've dealt with a range of questions in a very professional manner. I've always heard a balanced approach. Yes, this is going to be a lot of money. This is what you need to consider. I've never heard anybody direct a vote. I do think that the initial part of this whole process deals with the bus shelter advertising, and there may be some merit to that argument. I don't think it defined vote, but particularly now with respect to number 3, changes to materials and information, I don't think that that's helpful at this point because it then changes the direction of information flow to the publics. The publics are out there talking about this. Some are for, some are against. Most are trying to discern where they should go. The reason I'm fairly familiar with this, I used the 6 pop-up signs, the boards, yesterday at Vic High because in November of last year I was the council liaison to Fernwood, and one of the members of the Fernwood Community Association is a grade 11 student at Vic High. She asked if she could bring some of her friends and have a discussion. So we met at Fernwood Pizza, we talked about this. They said, this is really interesting, could you come and do a presentation to the school? So yesterday, I humped the 6 boards and the 6 easels to Vic High, went and I talked to probably about 25, 30 people all in. They asked some really good questions. And if you go through the boards, and I know that we were given a picture of the Connect magazine front page, if you open it up, there's a whole bunch of material that talks about the different options. There are an incredible number of staff members who've put time and energy into this in, I think, a very balanced way, and I don't think changing the materials and information now for next Sunday, whatever the 26th is, 20 Sunday, I don't think that that's helpful to the cause at all. I recognize that this will put us in the crosshairs of those people who have already made a decision, one way or the other, but we can't change information flow now and denigrate what we've put out in the past, and I think staff have done an incredibly good job at the pop-ups, particularly.
Thank you, Councillor. On the amendment, anybody else? All right. All in favor of the amendment? Councillor Hammond, Councillor Gardner. In opposition, Councillor Loughton, Councillor Thompson, myself, Councillor Cardona, Councillor Coleman, and Councillor Dell. So that amendment fails. I will just note for the public that Councillor Kim departed because she is the City Council's representative to the Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, which has a meeting regrettably right now. That being said, Councillor Gardner, you still have the floor on the main motion.
Thank you very much.
Just before you start, Councillor, yeah, there you go. Thank you very much for deleting that. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. As I had already mentioned, once councillors who have the right to speak out in anything became involved directly, I believe this message from the city got muddled. Not by the city, but by people who were interpreting different ways when they saw public statements being made by councillors. I have a particular problem with one piece of information. It is exactly the information provided, and it is correct by the way the city normally communicates information. Over the past year, I've questioned assertions of tax impacts on the average residents. The city's statement regarding the pool suggests property taxes would see an average increase of $232 per resident for 20 years. To test the validity of this type of statement, we need to know what kind of residences were included and what were not. I've been doing some research on this, and it really quite concerns me. Again, this was not information created by our engagement people at all. The second point is, of course, which has been mentioned, is while the referendum for borrowing is $168.9 million, taxpayers must pay back $215 million because of the $47 million which was transferred from reserve funds to reduce the amount of the borrowing material. That is being declared, but the impact, really, people aren't quite aware of that I have spoken to anyway. The $47 million, as has been mentioned, would mean an increase of another about 2% of the costs for the pool. So we also heard a few months ago from various people, both businesses and homeowners, and I separate homeowners from most residents in this case, about how their impact of the 2024 taxes on them. For me, given what I've seen and the investigations I've done on the different types of housing we have in the city, and the fact that we have some housing units with paying zero property taxes. And of course, it goes up to very expensive single-family dwellings. We have very much, I believe, a multimodal distribution of housing types and therefore levels of property tax. At this point, I would not be surprised if the average homeowner experiences an increase similar to that of the predicted businesses, maybe between $500 and $600 per year. That is one reason why I seek clarification on absolutely everything. And again, the clarification being driven by, I think, the muddled message, not muddled by the city, but muddled because all of a sudden there's different sources of information coming in, the city staff information and information or positions being taken by councillors, and that has really muddled it. I will not be participating in either a yes campaign or a no campaign. I want to hear from the residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Thompson and Councillor Cardona.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that everybody on council always wants the most complete and detailed information going to the public about something like this. I'm opposed to the motion in its current form because I think that the direction it gives to staff is quite vague. Whether it was the attempted amendment to be more balanced or put a stop to, I don't think it provides significant direction. My colleague mentioned Donald Trump, and to me, put a stop to one-sided advertising sounds like a drain the swamp political slogan rather than clear direction that staff can follow. So I think it would be more valuable information to the public if we can indicate the scale of cuts that are going to be required to the budget elsewhere if the Crystal Pool referendum goes ahead. So I said in an earlier agenda item that Crystal Pool would cost 2,000 times the size of the grant to the Other Guys Theatre. That's certainly going to result in cuts to services and programs. I did put a blog post out on that, but that reached probably about a half dozen people. So it would be useful for the city to provide information about that. The costs of Crystal Pool are not going to be paid for with a tax increase, contrary to the background of this motion, where it says it'll add $256 for each year, or even if it's $500. We're not going to be increasing taxes because we're already, without Crystal Pool, telling staff to cut services, bring us back, more specifically, bring us back multiple scenarios on how we could cut services in order to achieve a certain tax target. So clearly what's happening this year and what's happened in previous years is that council sets a political target for tax increases and then makes cuts to the budget to achieve that. That's what would happen if the Crystal Pool referendum goes ahead with a yes. So again, it's not about increasing taxes by, the value of a cup of coffee per week or something like that. It's about what services we're going to cut from the ones that we provide to the public. So I think that we do need to provide that information to the public. What we've got now is kind of notional information about the potential impact on taxes. But what we need to do is to be able to tell the public, okay, so if Crystal Pool goes ahead, these are the kinds of scales of cuts that are going to be required. I think we also need to address the question of what if the referendum doesn't go ahead. I've been asked by members of the public, Dave, what is going to happen? Is there really no plan B? And I've pointed out there are numerous options if it doesn't go ahead. So I think that's important information to the public to have as well from the city. So I'd like to propose a couple of amendments to add this clarity that I'm describing. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I would propose that we delete item number 1 and replace it with indicate the scale of cuts needed to fund comma, providing meaningful comparisons. And if anybody is interested in seconding that, I can motivate.
Before I look for a seconder while staff are just cleaning that up, Ms. Thompson, I'm just wondering, given that this is asking for something that's sort of related to the request from council previously to provide options around caps on taxation, does this give you sufficient direction to do the work? Do you understand this too?
Through the mayor, if I understand the intent of this correctly, similarly to how council asked us to bring back options related to 7%, 6, 5, and 4, what we can do right now is identify the dollar amount that this would entail. So if the intent is to show the totality of the tax increase that's required, we do know that based on our information on borrowing the $168.9 million, that the annual, once all the borrowing has been undertaken, the annual debt payment would be just over $14 million. So if that is what council is intending, then we obviously have that information. What services would have to be scaled back, that we don't have. But if this is an order of magnitude kind of thing, then we certainly have that available.
The reason I asked that, Councillor Thompson, related to this is that I think that asking staff to provide that supposition would be more in line with the direction that we've given them already around what would it look like if we asked you to cap things at 4, 5, 6, and 7%. So I'm not sure that there is sufficient time to realistically ask them to do this, particularly because they're going to be coming back to us for our comments on that. So, I mean, obviously it's entirely up to you if you want to proceed with this, but I would find this challenging for staff to do in a meaningful way, given the time sensitivity.
Well, Mayor, maybe you can help me with the wording. What I'm thinking is that we did, as you both mentioned, receive that memo in the context of the budget discussion, and I can tell you that members of the public that I've spoken with are unaware of the details of that memo. They've never seen it. So what I was thinking was, if we had a list of, typical potential cuts that were provided to us in that memo, saying, this would save us 10 million, this would save us 100,000. That could give members of the public some idea, some sense of the scale of cuts to services that would be needed. Because right now, people are under the misapprehension that they just shell out an extra $5 a week. And that's just not what's going to happen.
Ms. Thompson, you indicated in your response to my question that you could fairly easily say this scale is X percentage or X dollars. So, Councillor Thompson, would that be sufficient?
No, I don't. Sorry, Mayor, I don't think it gives the public a sense of what they maybe face losing. Like,
okay. All right. Well,
are they going to lose arts funding? Are they going to lose any further acquisition for parks or for buildings? So
let's go back to our proper process. I'll ask if there's a seconder for this, and then we can have that discussion. Is there a seconder for this amendment? Councillor Loughton is seconding. Go ahead, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, again, this is bringing some clarity and some realism to the discussion. Clarity in the sense of let's talk about what the dollars are, and realism in the sense of we're not going to increase taxes above our politically acceptable level. We're going to cut services to pay for Crystal Pool if that goes ahead. So I think it's important for the public to understand just how this is going to be carried out, and roughly how many things are we going to have to cut in order to pay for Crystal Pool if it goes ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Loughton is a seconder.
I seconded just for conversation.
Thank you. On the amendment, Councillor Hammond, Councillor Cardona.
Mayor, thanks. Actually, the interesting thing is I'm not opposed to this. The difficulty. Well, no, not that. It's the difficulty is we can't give a decision whether it's operational or whether it's budgetary or we call it political. We can't give that decision. We can't say to the public right now that, hey, if you go for this, don't worry, because we'll make sure we absorb this and we will make those cuts, because we can't bind ourselves to our budgetary considerations. I think the more that the public finds out about what this could mean, and if the public says, yes, we want this, and in fact they say, we want it and we're willing to pay over and above anything else that you come up with in your budgeting process, then fine, then we have got the direction. And me as a taxpayer, I'll just have to, I'll have to pay that, of course, and because it's the will of the majority. But the difficulty is that as much as I appreciate that this starts getting even more discussion about what this could mean if this goes ahead and then we do decide to cut it, it's just that we can't have our crystal ball. That's the difficulty, is we can't say we know what the majority of the council is going to do, that we are automatically going to cut it, as opposed to whatever we agree to, we would go on top of that. So I like the fact that this is getting into more information for people. I just don't think that I can commit to it, because I can't automatically say that we would be taking that amount off. Maybe we will, maybe we won't.
Thank you. Councillor Cardona. And then come back to Councillor.
Thanks, Mayor. I think it's a very problematic amendment. I'm sympathetic to the mover, but there's two problems. First of all, it amends a highly problematic motion. Number two is still there, which I'm vehemently opposed to. So even contemplating this amendment challenges me. But the more important issue is that it's not fair to our staff to speculate on what the scale of cuts needed would be. I mean, council has options. One option is just to raise taxes. They go up by 1.8%, that's it. The other option is to somehow offset those increases by cutting something else. But we can't have that conversation until we see if the referendum passes. This sort of weirdly ties the hands of staff and asks them to speculate. So I would suggest that we defeat this amendment and defeat this motion and re-raise this question as part of the budgetary discussions next month after we know whether or not the referendum passed or not. Because it's not fair to say to staff, what scale of cuts would be needed? Well, there's a bunch of assumptions in there that I don't think it's fair to put into the laps of our staff. Those are decisions that have to be made by council. So I can't support this amendment for those two reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Dell, Councillor Gardner, and then back to Councillor Thompson.
Likewise, I can't support this. I mean, the referendum is in 2 weeks right now. These are discussions that if we wanted to do this, we should have done months and months ago. I can already see staff panicking of like, why are we even discussing this 2 weeks away? There's a lot of ways we can pay for this pool. We can increase taxes. We can make service cuts if we want to. I wouldn't support that. We have a $25 million federal government grant that we're waiting on. We have been a leader in British Columbia on housing construction, and the province has promised to give funding for community amenities for municipalities that build housing, so I'm expecting some funding coming from there. This is not the right time to do this, and I think this would be a huge lift for staff and cause absolute chaos at council and for the public right now. There's a lot of ways that we can accomplish this, but this is not a way that I would support going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Time, please.
You have 4 minutes and 54 seconds.
Thank you. I share some of the comments that have just been made. This, I think, would have been very, very important to have done a few months ago, because I don't think staff could do it right now. And I'd like to remind everyone that with the budget survey, the general population was very clear. They preferred service cuts to tax increases. That is really something the public was clear on last year and this year, and I think we should respect that. Again, though, the intent is wonderful, but I must say I'm really talking about balance. We now have sympathetic and we have fishy. So I guess maybe we've covered it all. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, back to you.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to address a few of those points. I can't say I understood the last one, but I just wanted to mention that my colleague is quite right in saying we can't bind ourselves to service cuts, but we also can't bind ourselves to tax increases. And right now, what we're presenting to the public is a tax increase, and we're not giving any information about the service cut side of that potential. So we should provide both, in my opinion. Asking staff to speculate about what's going to be cut. Staff have already been asked to speculate about what's going to be cut, and they came back to us with a report. The suggestion that it's chaos, that staff can't do it, that there's too much information being asked. Again, this information has already been provided. It would just be a matter of copying that out of the staff report on the budget and pasting it onto the website. That's not a lot to ask. Yeah, so it's the analysis has already been done. We just have to make it more public. As for funding sources for this, whether it's tax cuts or tax increases or service cuts or extra grants, we've only applied for a $25 million grant, as far as I'm aware. And you know, federal and provincial governments are looking at cuts themselves, coming out of stimulus spending. Again, I'm just making a plea for providing information to the public, which is quite doable, on what's very likely to happen is cuts to services, as opposed to all of a sudden we were comfortable with 8% tax increase, now we're going to be comfortable with 10%, really? So I just, again, a plea for let's provide the information that the public needs to make its decision.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Oh, okay. All those in favor of the amendment? Councillor Loughton, Councillor Thompson. All those in opposition? Councillor Hammond, myself, Councillor Cardona, Councillor Coleman, Councillor Dell, and Councillor Gardner. So that amendment is defeated. Councillor Thompson, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't know what that indicates for the willingness of council to provide information that the public needs, but I'm going to push for another amendment to add, to replace number 1 with the following language.
Go ahead.
To note that other options exist if the project does not proceed, comma, such as refurbishment, a smaller facility, comma, a smaller facility, or pursuing a regional service for recreation.
Councillor Thompson, before I ask for a seconder, are you sure that you want to use the project as opposed to the referendum?
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. It should be referendum. Thanks.
So yes, I think.
I guess if the referendum fails is probably better wording. Thanks.
Sure, or does not succeed.
Yeah. Does not succeed
Doesn't,
instead of proceed.
Does not succeed.
Yeah.
Because I suspect you're intending that we have a conversation if in fact the referendum doesn't succeed as opposed to the project not proceeding.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment of what your intention
Thanks, yes,
okay.
that's much better.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Loughton is seconding. Go ahead, Councillor Thompson, and I'll note for you, you have just over 4.5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I have been asked by the public, what happens if it doesn't go ahead? I hear that we're not going to ever have a pool, and that's just, to me, very unlikely. I think we've been very clear with the public on the high value that pools and recreation centers have, especially near downtown, where people don't necessarily have those third spaces. It's important for children to learn how to swim. It's important for communities to have recreation centers. There's a whole lot of reasons why council isn't just going to walk away from the idea of a rec center or a pool if this particular one doesn't go ahead. For sure, we're going to go look at other options. Unfortunately, it appears that a lot of members of the public are just unaware that there are other options or that we would pursue them. So again, I think it's important to tell the public the information that they need. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Loughton is the seconder.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, I had this in my notes because it's actually something that is confusing to me. So if I'm confused about it, I think it's safe to say the public is confused about it as well, not to. But, and I think part of the reason there is that I have read in a few different places where the Yes campaign has stated that if the referendum fails, that means there will be no pool, end of story. Yet I read in the paper on the weekend, and I actually pulled the exact same quote that my colleague did, that you said that residents should not be concerned that a no vote means no pool. So I think this is really pertinent information that the public requires, and I'm going to support this amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Councillor Hammond, you have barely 2.5 minutes.
I can support this. I like the idea of all kinds of information getting out to the public, and I think these are many of the things that they need to know. Thanks very much.
Well done. Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Cardona.
Thank you. A question of Director Soulier. Mr. Soulier, the reference was given to refurbishment when someone made a quote. That was from 2017 when Councillor Hammond mentioned it, and he quoted a statement of yours from 2017 about the refurbishment. Has there been any assessment since then as to possibility of refurbishment, or do you think your comment from 2017 still stands?
Mr. Soulier?
Through the Mayor, yes, I was asked very specifically about the options related to renovation or replacement or other options that Council considered. So the context of my response was around the decision that Council made. Council was presented with 3 options in 2017 as part of the feasibility study. Council chose to go with the option to replace. So everything that the city has done since has been in response to Council direction. And I think it's safe to say that any future direction from Council will be what staff do. We are not spending time on things that are outside of the bounds of Council's direction. So that is what we're planning to, that's what we're doing now, and that's what we will continue to do.
So thank you. I interpret that to mean that there has been no more recent look at refurbishment, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. So we're not too sure if that's an option at this point. But I'm not objecting to the wording of the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Cardona.
Thanks, Mayor. What I find so disheartening about these amendments is that the referendum is in just over 2 weeks. We have given clear direction to staff to put forward a certain design that was decided upon unanimously. We gave direction to staff on a comm strategy, which, as we'll get to in a few minutes, was also decided upon unanimously. It is extremely poor governance. After many people have already voted, I have voted. Hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, have already voted via mail-in ballots, and early voting is coming up. It is insane to change directions like this in the 11th hour. It makes no sense. It's very poor governance. We decided not to pursue refurbishment. In my conversations with staff, it is because refurbishing the building, while technically feasible, would cost more money. And the TC article says that. And you could ask staff about that yourself. With the BC building code, with needs for accessibility and seismic, it would cost more than replacing it. Just like Vic High. Vic High ended up costing more than the cost of building a new high school, but because it had heritage value, the community decided it was worth it. A smaller facility, technically feasible, pursuing a regional service makes no sense. The CRD has no regional or sub-regional service to build pools in Victoria. It's not a thing. There's no chance the CRD is going to create a sub-regional service to build aquatic facilities in Victoria. Victorians didn't help pay for Perks or Oak Bay or Esquimalt, and the residents of those jurisdictions are not going to help pay for ours. It's just not a thing. It's misleading information for the public. The only thing that is certain, if the referendum fails, is that Council will have 2 decisions. One, to close the pool in the short term, or the other, per the staff report that everyone seems to have forgotten about, pour $9 million into it to keep it on life support for a few more years. Those are the only actual decisions before us. We do not have the ability to tie the hands of a future Council. We don't have the time to start over on a new process. All the design work, the engagement.
Councillor Cardona, you're veering into the main motion now.
Okay. But it relates to the amendment here, which is that we don't have the ability to tie the hands of future councils. Yes, it is possible if it fails in the future, a future council could pick the ball up and continue to run with it. But we don't have time to do that during our mandate. It doesn't make sense to falsely and misleadingly imply that to voters who have already voted, who are already in the process of voting. So I oppose this amendment. And the problem, again, back to the mover and seconder, is that it is amending a very problematic motion. Number 2 would still be there, which we haven't even had a chance to discuss. So if this is really an important thing to add information to the website, it should be defeated and be brought up as a motion arising or something. But this is not appropriate now to change course on our comm strategy 16 days before an election that people have actually already voted in. This is undermining the credibility of the referendum. How do people not see that? We're not supposed to be undermining our own referendum.
Councillor, I'm going to ask you to just hold on with that because you are certainly veering into the main motion at this point. Councillor Thompson, you are the holder of this amendment. Do you have any final comments on the amendment?
Just that this council could easily be the council that decides to pursue different options. And on the point about there is no regional service, we over at the CRD table, we just gave staff direction to create a new regional service for transportation. So if the votes were there, we could do that for recreation as well.
Thank you very much. Anyone further on this amendment? Councillor Loughton.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I've already mentioned this, but I think it is problematic that the Yes campaign has said that if the referendum fails, that's it, it's over. I think this is really important that the public understands that that's not the case. Additionally, there is Panorama Recreation is run by the CRD. I'm on their website right now. I see the CRD's logo. Well, so there's that. So there is precedent for some kind of regional cooperation on this. So I wanted to make that point as well. Thanks.
Anyone further on this amendment? All right, so we clearly have much more to discuss with this. We're already into our lunch break. And so I'm going to call a halt to this at this point. I've got Councillor Coleman and Councillor Dell on this amendment. That's where we will start when we come back. And once we deal with this amendment, Councillor Thompson, you still have the floor. Given that it's a little bit afternoon, we'll reconvene at 1:05. On item G3, this is the council member motion about balanced information for the Crystal Pool referendum. We are on our fourth amendment, and we are up to Councillor Coleman. On this amendment, please.
Thank you. And I will reaffirm my concern about trying to do policy through council member motions on an ongoing basis. That said, to this amendment, I was reminded by a staff member that I was told if I ever wrote my journals or my memories of being at City Hall, it might be entitled Motion Sickness.
Indeed.
And perhaps there's some truth to that. I don't know. If you went to any of the pop-ups, these questions were asked regularly of staff, and the staff response was, at least when I was there, there may be other options, but we've been given a direction by council. It is to move this referenda question forward, and if it fails, we go back to council for direction. So asking to put other options now into the information flow doesn't make an awful lot of sense, because we're changing the template of the information flow to the public. I will point out, because it's been brought up earlier in this discussion, we are not the Yes campaign, nor are we the No campaign. They are arm's length from us. They will put out whatever they want. They will capture people's attention. Sometimes that will confuse the public. I'm aware of that. What we're talking about is our opportunity to go to the public with our information package. If you look at the binder that's included for all the pop-up things, just because I dealt with it yesterday, it's fairly substantial. It has a Q&A section that isn't definitive on everything. It can't be, but it does answer the questions about the referenda question in front of the public, and two options, if it passes, two options, A or B, with respect to location. This is asking us to actually change the tenor of the whole flow of information. So I don't think this is supportable.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dell, on the amendment.
Sure, yeah, I'll oppose the amendment. I mean, I think it just puts out some challenging information that would require a much larger discussion of what happens next. I don't think any of these options are the realistic options of what happens next. So to throw those out with no discussion or research is hugely problematic. There's many, many options of what could happen next. For me, what would happen next is none of these things. And I want to just note, I think one of the challenges that I'm having is all of this stuff has been explored before. The smaller facility was explored when they did a huge amount of consultation in 2016 to 2018, and it came back that this is the pool that Victoria needs. It's a larger pool, so that's why we're looking at this here. the 2011 report on the engineering report, the mechanical and electric, this is on refurbishment, the mechanical and electrical systems are not only unable to keep up with these changing needs, but have effectively reached a point of failure. The normal lifespan of the aquatic and facility fitness is probably 20 years, so none of the above is unusual for aging facilities that continued without any major upgrades for double that period. Having completed this building assessment, it is the opinion of the consulting team that the Crystal Pool and Fitness Center is at the end of its effective life and in need of serious attention. Numerous assessments and recommendations have been made. My point being is, like, multiple times we've looked into the option of refurbishment and was suggested it's not possible and to move on. And so I think we need a lot more work after. Let's get to February 8th, figure out what happens, and then if not, then let's have a proper discussion. I mean, maybe all of these things are on the table, maybe they're not. But to just throw this out with no staff report, I think is just problematic for the work that staff has done. We directed them to do what they're doing right now, and we are now changing that direction at the last minute, which is, I think, just not fair. So I'll be opposing that and then the broader motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cardona on the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm going to echo all of that, and I've just been sitting here today feeling kind of demoralized, honestly, about this debate. And I'm demoralized because I feel like it's so offensive to our staff. We gave unanimous direction to our staff many months ago in September to pursue a certain comms strategy. I think it's important that we trust our staff, that they have conveyed accurate, truthful, and important information to the public. A year before that, we made a unanimous decision to move forward with a certain design. If people didn't like the design, they should have spoken up at that time. If they didn't like the comms strategy, they should have spoken up at that time. It's immensely bizarre, and I would argue unethical, to potentially introduce radically different information into the information flow, as Councillor Coleman says, when it's 16 days before Election Day, when hundreds, if not thousands of people have already voted. I have already voted. It's not fair to just say, well, here's a whole bunch of new information, and it is essentially policy making on the fly. There are some other options. If it fails, of course. In the first instance, we have to decide what to do with the current facility. It's my understanding that the facility needs to close in the short to shortish term. Beyond that, those are other conversations that can be had if the referendum fails. The mail-out has already gone out. All the information has gone out. Most of the pop-ups have already happened. The fundamental problem with this amendment is the timing here, Mayor. If people had issues with this stuff, bring it up months ago. And in fact, I'll ask you, through the Mayor to staff, how long has the information been public on the website?
Mr. Johnson?
Through the Mayor, our information campaign about the project has been live since October. And the website, I'll just say for information, the information website on the Crystal Pool is the most visited site across our entire website for information.
Thank you. So the point being, it's been up for almost 4 months. We don't need to be throwing out random new bits of information that's going to confuse voters. I can appreciate on some level that the idea is to clarify things, but when you introduce information this late into the process, it not only undermines the validity of the process, but it actually confuses voters. Because people have already done their research, they've done their homework, they've ordered their ballots, and many people have already voted. So I think this is really, really poor governance. And it adds to a very problematic motion to begin with, and I think the only logical thing to do here is to defeat it. If the referendum does end up failing, we can have a conversation in February about what we're doing next.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe, Councillor Thompson, you may close this debate as
Wrap
your
it up.
amendment.
Okay. Thanks very much. Once again, I think it's important that voters have relevant information. To me, this is relevant. Whether it's going to confuse people, I can tell you that people are already confused by the lack of this information. I do have people contacting me saying, well, there's not going to be anything. We're never going to have a pool. That's just not necessarily true. Council has options. This amendment isn't requesting a fundamental change in the messaging. All it is saying maybe put a couple extra pieces of information on the website. So it's not a big deal for staff. It's not a big deal for the public to receive a little more information. People are asking questions. They want more information. Also, my amendments here do not signal support for the overall motion or take a position on the referendum. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on the amendment. And so moved and seconded, commented upon by a number of people. All those in favor of the amendment, Councillor Hammond, Councillor Loughton, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Gardner. In opposition, myself, Councillor Cardona, Councillor Coleman, and Councillor Dell. So in the absence of Councillor Kim, who is at another meeting on our behalf, that amendment fails on a tie. Councillor Thompson, you still have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor. On the main motion, are we? Is that where we're
yes,
at? Oh, okay.
On the main motion, yes.
I'll just say we've had a good discussion of this. Unfortunately, I've heard some comments from folks over the lunch break, several people. They appear to have mistaken my points about wanting more information for the public as somehow either supporting other aspects of this motion or taking a position on the referendum. And I just want everybody in the public to understand and be clear that if you're hearing this, you're being misled. I want the public to have vital information about this project. It's important to me that the public understands that it's, if it goes ahead, the way it's going to be paid for is through cuts to services. This is a prediction, of course. It's not binding on future councils, but as I've explained, council is already looking for budget cuts, regardless of Crystal Pool. When you add Crystal Pool in, council will be looking for deeper budget cuts. That's just the reality of what we're facing. I would encourage the members of the public to look at the December 4th memo from our director, Thompson, of our finance team to council, which explains the various cuts that would need to be made to city services in order to fund the tax reductions that council is already looking for, and then think deeper cuts than that. As for the second amendment that I'd proposed, it's relevant information, the what if. And I'll just point out, there are already claims in the what if camp, and they're wrong. And so I think that providing more information about those, the what if options would have been more useful for members of the public. So again, what I want is for people to have more information, not less. But as for the overall motion, I think that there's a lot of problems with it, which my colleagues have already explained, and I've explained some of those problems. I don't support this motion overall, and I'll be voting against it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cardona.
Thanks, Mayor. Is it acceptable to refer to materials enclosed that we have now risen and reported on?
Yes, provided that they don't lean into legal advice. Yes, that's one of the reasons that we went into closed earlier this morning, was to allow there to be an inclusion of some of the closed materials.
Okay, so Mayor, I recall in our closed report from some months ago, we were shown images of what the public would be seeing in our neutral and balanced approach that we supported unanimously. Would it be procedurally correct and appropriate and fair if we were to bring those up on the screen?
I believe Mr. Kingsley has anticipated that request and has something ready to go. Yes, there you go.
Could you just zoom in on the poster itself, not the wording, because I want to focus on the poster right now. Thanks. So I'll be coming back to this shortly. Okay. But first, I would like to make some general comments about the motion that's before us. And I've seen a lot of bad motions in the last 2 years, but this one really takes the cake. I was truly embarrassed when I saw it hit our agenda. And the reason that I was embarrassed is because I knew the impact it would have on our staff. Probably the first rule of good governance and of leadership is to take responsibility for your own decisions. Never ever, under any circumstances, should a leader throw their staff under the bus. And that's what's occurred here. When we imply that our staff is biased, that they are one-sided, when they are following direction that we gave, it shames them. How do you think staff feels back in their offices right now? And I'm not just talking about our senior leadership team. I'm talking about the many people who have worked on the Crystal Pool project. Dozens of people have worked on this project. They have worked hard. They have worked faithfully. They have carried out the will of council. And it is unconscionable, truly unconscionable, that a motion such as this one would shame our staff. That has an adverse effect on staff morale. It has an adverse effect on our work culture. It's redolent of the last council. That's the kind of shit they would have done. It's not okay to do that. If people had a problem with the comms strategy that was laid out by this council, which passed unanimously and closed, or if they had a problem with the designs, which passed unanimously in open, then they should have raised those months ago. Not 16 days before the election, not after the writ has dropped it, not after people have already voted, because that looks very, very fishy, like you're trying to spike a process. And I would argue that, in fact, it does undermine the validity of our referendum. It undermines the credibility of this government. And there are people out there who are going to be following along on this. They're going to feel confused. They're going to feel overwhelmed. And some of those people are going to stay home. They're going to say, you know what, forget about it. I don't trust the process. I'm not going to vote. That means voter suppression. Talk about being the 51st state. Here it is. Ugly politics combined with voter suppression. It's truly unconscionable. So let's back up for a minute, okay, folks, since there's been a lot of BS today. There's actually two different pieces of communications that have gone out from the city. Two very different pieces. The one I'm holding up in my right hand comes from the Chief Electoral Officer. And this has gone to every household in Victoria. It says, Crystal Pool referendum, vote February 8th. It doesn't have any information about the project. It's merely information about where and how to vote. So this is one part of the comm strategy, which was agreed to by council, which is beyond neutral. It's just the basic facts. It doesn't say anything about the project. Then there is this, which is the Connect newsletter, which replicates the poster you're seeing before us that was passed unanimously and closed, that replicates the information that has been discussed in the many pop-ups online, on social media, that has been out in the public domain since October. If you actually look at this, I don't know where the camera is, but if you actually look at this Connect newsletter that also went to every single household in the city, it replicates exactly what you're seeing before you, which was agreed to on, I believe, September 14th, 2024 and closed. I find it very hard to believe that the mover of this original motion was quote-unquote shocked to see this poster at a bus stop when he in fact was involved in unanimously approving it in closed. That's a lie, Councillor Hammond. You just lied to the public. What else am I supposed to call it? Mayor, am I out of line here?
Yes, you are.
Okay, all right, then I'm out of line. But I would say it replicates exactly what was decided upon in close, which was to have a neutral and balanced approach. And that is what staff have done. I want to apologize to staff for having felt shamed by this motion. You folks have done phenomenal work to get factual information out to the public. And I am appreciative. And if you open up the Connect newsletter and you look at page 2, you've got a bunch of information, a bunch of factual information that gets at all the implications of the referendum, the north and the south option. It talks about the trees that could be affected. It talks about the cost. It talks about the timeline. It talks about whether or not the pool could remain open or not. It talks about the implications to the basketball courts. It talks about all the information. Not all the information can be included on a pamphlet, but that's why we have a very comprehensive website, pop-ups, social media, and many other forms of information that are accessible to the public. Going back to the motion itself, the absurd motion itself, it says, quote, that the city should, quote, include arguments or reasoning for both the yes and no sides, end quote. Is that a joke? It is not the job of politically neutral civil servants to make arguments. That is not what a government does. What a government does is convey factual information. And they have done that with aplomb. It is up to individual voters to decide what they want to do with that factual information. It is not up to Director Johnson to make arguments. It's not up to Director Newman to make arguments. That is fundamentally an unfair thing to ever ask of politically neutral staff. By way of example, the South option. The South option, which is clearly explained on the mail-out that went to every household, clearly explains that if the South option is chosen and the referendum passes, more trees would need to get cut down. However, it means that the pool, theoretically, if the foundation isn't affected, could stay open for the duration of the build. Is that a pro or a con? Is that a yes or a no argument? That's actually quite subjective. It's up to the individual voter to decide what they want to do with that information. Some voters will say, well, I don't want trees to get cut down. Therefore, it's a con. Others will say, well, I want the pool to remain open. Therefore, it's a pro. What counts as pro and con information, yes or no information, is up to the individual voter to decide. We report, you decide. We are not a third-party campaign. We're not the yes campaign. We're not the no campaign. We're the City of Victoria. It's our job to convey factual information, and we have done that. I will just reiterate that two things happened unanimously over the last year. Number one, this government decided unanimously to move forward with a certain design. We did not want to do refurbishment because our best understanding is that it would cost more to do that. We did not want a smaller facility because when we talked to 4,400 people out in the community, this is the pool that they asked us to build. Let's stand by our own decision-making, people. The second thing that happened unanimously is that we gave direction first and closed. Thankfully, we've now risen and reported on it. Unanimously, we gave that direction to staff. We said, staff, here's what we want you to do. Go out and make a neutral and balanced approach. This is the information that would be included. We trust you. We trust you as professional civil servants to convey factual information. And staff have done that. I've been to the pop-ups. Others have been to the pop-ups. Staff are not biased. They're not partisan. They'll tell you all the complex implications you want to know. But it's not up to staff's job to make an argument about what is a yes or a no. Obviously, the cost is what it is. And an individual voter can decide what they want to do with that information. But it's not up to... Huh?
30 seconds.
Okay. So I think this is highly regrettable. I think it should be defeated post-haste. And I want to again apologize to the public for the attempt to spike this process and drive voter suppression. And I want to apologize to staff for having been needlessly shamed by certain hypocritical members of this body. Thanks, Mayor.
Anybody else? Councillor Gardner, I believe you had your hand up, and you have 3 minutes and 44 seconds.
Thank you. Slide, please. Going back to that slide, sorry, no one got my email. Staff hit it, whoops, that you had the slide. Can you stop my time, please?
Yep.
Thank you. The slide says a lot. When it says cons, vulnerable to attack is biased. And that is unfortunately what has happened. And I'm going to go back to the statement I made a few minutes ago. I had hoped that the city's presentation would be neutral and the councillors would remain neutral so as not to unduly influence public opinion. This changed when a councillor or two or three, heaven only knows at this point, became involved with community groups voicing opinions of the initiative. While any member of council has the right to speak out in favour of or in opposition to a project which is subject to referendum, the message from the city became muddled as interpretations to the city materials were seen in a different light. That is what happened here, and that was post seeing this slide for the first time a few months ago. My second comment is, what a rich lecture. A few weeks ago, we had something coming before us. Denied, city staff said, but it went through. Talk about disrespect for our planning department. That was it. So I find it very rich that someone's calling me hypocritical, started out by saying we were fishy, and has gone on with that kind of tone. It is so disrespectful. And the general public wonders what's going on in this council? That lecture said it all. It was not respectful to me, it was not respectful to other councillors here, and it definitely was not respectful to the general public, especially given what a couple of councillors have said very loudly and clearly, be it on CFAX or through their tweets or through their messages such as, help needed, who wants a yes crystal pool sign? The February 8th referendum is a critical day for the future of Victoria. The current pool is falling apart and Victoria deserves a world-class recreation facility and pool. But most people simply don't know about the referendum. Please let me know if you want a sign or order one from the Say Yes to Crystal Pool. That approach is what brought us to where we are today and brought us to the insults that so many of us have received today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Coleman.
Let me try and lower the temperature a little bit. I think actually this slide, which was unanimously endorsed and was seen by the motion's mover just after Christmas, is the seed of the discontent, as we see it at the moment. And I happen to agree. It doesn't say vote. That's fair comment. That's not a reason to take down the process. It is a one-off in that all those bus shelter ads are now done. There's no more going up. But I've also been part of the witness of the process in a number of the pop-ups. I've talked to lots of people who ask pertinent questions. They say, on the refurbishment issue, why can't you just replace that? I go, do you understand the age of the pool? And they said, it was built in 1971. I said, yeah, that would make it 54 years old. That's the outside walls and the roof and perhaps part of the tank, but it's not the mechanicals. Some of the mechanicals were brought up from the old Crystal Gardens, which is 100 years old. So the reality for this facility is some of it is 11 years younger than I am, and some of it is considerably older than I am, which is why we have to think about retooling components rather than being able to buy them off the shelf. That's one issue. We're talking about a replacement, and I will go back to some of not the nuts and bolts of this application, but the reason we need to have a discussion about the pool. The referendum may pass or it may fail, but we have a duty to the publics to make sure that there are recreational opportunities available to them. We will find out what direction that might look like on February the 8th. But I go back to one of the default positions that I've held. In the last decade in British Columbia, 858 people died by drowning. Mm-hmm. As you take pools out of communities, you may see that grow. And that's not, 32 of those deaths were in 2023 on Vancouver Island. So we are talking about Victoria's response to having swimming lessons, particularly for young people, but also hydrotherapy for older people. Those are discussions we're going to have to carry on. And a number of my friends have said, well, why are you going for this Olympic golden Cadillac? And I go, well, first of all, FINA, the international body, will tell you very quickly, this pool is not Olympic size. It will never host an international event. That's right. What we're doing is it, as I drive, the 1997 Honda Accord? No. It's not the low end, which would be really bad refurbishment. It's somewhere in between that golden Cadillac and what I drive. But we're going to have a discussion about what the people of Victoria have as a going forward water and wellness center. And the reality is there are lots of people who say this should be a regional facility. The fact is, what's there before us is a local facility that some members of the region will use. So we may have to have a discussion about what we charge people at the door. That's a different discussion because it goes to the revenue stream. But do we need to now change the whole flow of information? No, I think that at the moment, the information's out there. Is it confusing for the public? Yes. I've been through a number of referenda with this council over the years, and if we made a mistake, perhaps it was trying to be neutral, because most of the other referendums I've gone through have had a cheerleader. That's a choice we made. We're living with that now, and we tried to take a neutral, balanced approach. I will point out that neutral, in its purest sense, is probably public. We're going to ask you if you want to spend up to $168.9 million and you'll get a pool. That's probably the purest neutral question you can ask. That doesn't help the public. So we're now trying to make it more acceptable to more people. I don't know how we're going to do that. So I'm against this motion because I think we've already laid the groundwork, and we're going to have to try and help those who are still confused about what the reality is. And that's not the information that flows from the yes campaign or the no campaign. It's about supporting our staff as they answer questions from the public. And the only answer they can provide to what is the next step is, we don't know, we have to go back to council for direction. If this fails, our job is to come back to council and say, what direction do you give now? Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a few words about this slide. This was a slide that council saw, and in the context of a discussion about taking a neutral position as a council versus taking a yes-no position or a cheerleading position, as my colleague said. We had opportunity to comment on the wording on that slide. We all saw it. What we didn't do, which apparently some members of the public are again under a slight misconception, we didn't get into the details of the communications that were going to go out. We didn't get into the wording of any of the communications. We didn't get into the exact content of the information that would be provided to the public. So just wanted to clarify that again, just in case anybody in the public was feeling like, well, because we saw that slide, we knew the entire communication strategy. We didn't. So that's all for that. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else on the main motion? Councillor Lutton.
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. I just want to say that I too, when I saw this ad, I was surprised. And even though we had seen this before, I think there's a difference between hearing about it back in the summer and then seeing it out in reality. So it's almost like the theory and the practice, and then how is this landing on the ground? And the public are trying to discern what to do, so they need as much information as possible so that they can make an informed decision. And when we're getting feedback from the public that this is confusing to them, I think it is prudent for us to respond to that. So I think this motion was necessary, just in a way to share more information with the public, and to maybe, I'm not exactly sure, but maybe staff will have a little bit more information when these questions are asked at the pop-ups, like what happens if the referendum fails? Well, it goes back to council, and then there's, X, Y, Z options that might happen. I think it's important, the point that was made about the money that came from our reserves that has financing costs attached to it that also needs to be paid back. That $47 million needs to be included in the borrowing. And that's in, did you just point to, sorry, the information's in there. Okay, so that's good, so that people understand that. So again, I just think that we needed to have this conversation, even though, I doubt that this motion is going to pass. I think it was important for the public's sake, because after all, that's who we work for. And this is an enormous amount of money. So I'll thank the movers for bringing it. And I want to be neutral on this, is why I voted in favor of the referendum in the first place. Otherwise, council should have just made a decision rather than going through this whole process. So I encourage the public to get out, to go to the pop-ups, to learn as much as they can, to become as informed as they can, and most importantly, vote. Get out, and the answer will lie with that decision that's made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? Councillor Hammond. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thanks. Mayor, I want to be respectful of our closed process. Can I ask to be very clear, what was it that we decided in closed?
Earlier today, when we went into closed in between the two council member motions, we rose and reported. We decided that we would rise and report on the non-legal aspects of the closed conversation about the Crystal Pool referendum.
And so what was the position that we were asked to take and we unanimously agreed to?
Our motion specifically asked us to receive a legal report, the contents of which we are not able to disclose because it was legal advice. And we were asked to consider whether or not we would take a position on the pool referendum.
So did we, and that was unanimous?
Yes.
And we agreed we would not take any position?
Correct.
Did we unanimously agree to this slide?
This slide was part of the presentation that was given to us at that meeting in closed.
Okay. So, but was that part of the motion that we agreed to this slide?
This presentation was part of the report, yes.
Okay. Could I go down to the slide below this?
Do you have that one loaded? Just take a second, okay.
Let me ask, while this is up, did we also then agree that this would be vulnerable to attack as biased?
Just one second, staff, before you pull up any slides, if there's any reference on the slide to legal advice, you'll need to redact that. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you there. Could you say that again?
I'm saying, did we agree that this was vulnerable to attack as biased on the cons?
We agreed to this presentation.
Okay. And are we getting the other slide
Yes,
eventually?
I think they're just checking to make sure there was no legal advice on it.
Apologies, Mayor. We just need a couple seconds to
Sure.
prep the
No
slide
problem.
for disclosure.
Yep, absolutely. It's a fine hair we're splitting between legal advice and public information. Sure. Take your time. Thirty-five seconds. Mm-hmm. Is that the one you were referring to?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
So we agreed to take no position, and yet we were told that this is a vote for the yes.
So just to be clear, what staff did was they presented us with their supposition at the time of any risks associated with taking a position, yes or no, and any risks associated with taking no position or being neutral.
Yes.
So there were three slides in this whole presentation which spoke to the pros and cons, as it says here, to yes, no, and neutral.
And so what is the third slide?
That would be, I guess, the no slide, wouldn't it? Take your time. Yep. Mhm.
Mayor, that's the one also.
Is that the one? Okay.
So when we agreed to take no position, did that mean that we were agreeing to this?
We received this report and made no objections.
Right. So basically, we were given a number of different options on what to look at. But I do not recall that we voted on which slide deck that is going to be presented to the public. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, the presentation was part of the report, and we received both.
Right. And because I did not memorize exactly what we were going to get, and my memory might have gone that, in fact, if we were going to be neutral, it might have been on this very slide. Because when this was put in the newspaper, I thought, you know what, this would be very appropriate. And, you know, I don't get to decide this matter. But the fact is, that this is where I was finding the bias came from on that Christmas Eve, and when I realized in the same way as one of my colleagues that we're suddenly getting into a lot more promotion of it, which I have no problem if that's what we were supposed to do. And so we did not vote on a slide deck. We did not vote on which poster. I recall this. I don't recall all the others. But the fact is that we were given information and we wanted it to be neutral. If some of us don't look at that as neutral, my apologies. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm not going to take any lectures from anyone around this table as to anything that I might say. To our staff, they are smart people, and they are not so thin-skinned as they can't figure out when Councillor Stephen Hammond or anyone else is concerned about bias, that I am saying they are biased and they are going against the interests of this council. The fact is, I can, you can, anyone can come up with something in which another person can say, hey, Stephen, you know, that might look like it's a little bit biased that way. No one's accusing me of being biased. All I want to make sure is that people get all the right information. And I agree with my colleague that at the very least, this discussion has been very worthwhile because it has brought up all kinds of information. Don't listen to any rants that someone has about me or anyone else. Make up your mind for yourself. And we will, at the end of the day, we will be deciding not by slide decks or what necessarily is going to be going out, but what the people need to know. And that's, this is a fascinating facility. It's going to cost a lot of money. And in the end, it's probably going to come down to those things. But the fact is that we were supposed to be taking no position on this, and from different interpretations, it can be seen as though perhaps that is what's coming across. No one is, I would never consider that anyone is trying to sabotage the process or put their thumb on the scale in the process, but that some people might see it as being done that way unintentionally. Therefore, I do encourage, like my colleagues, that people to get out and vote on February the 8th. This is going to be the biggest financial decision that this city has ever made, at least in $2,025, and therefore be very careful on what you're voting on. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Well done. You have 2 seconds left. Anyone else? You could have been 2 seconds. That's right. Anybody else on the main motion? And could you pull up the main motion, please? That would be helpful for us to know what we're voting on. Anybody else? Councillor Dell.
Sure. I'll just weigh in on a couple of things here. I'm not going to support the motion, primarily because I just personally don't find the advertising biased at all. I've looked at all the materials. I think one of the challenges that we're having here is that the information is complex. It definitely is complex. I've been getting a lot of questions of, well, what happened in Edmonton and what happened in New West and why does Burnaby do this? And I don't even know if staff can answer all those questions without doing the research. So just because I don't have the answers to everything doesn't mean that there's misleading information out there. Those are two different things. There's a 20-year history of this pool. I actually got a report when I met somebody back when they looked at replacing the pool in 2003. That's when I used to work there. And again, it was falling apart back then. The pool was $8 million at the time. We did a bunch more reports. They said a bunch more stuff. I don't know. It was $39 million. Did a bunch more reports, said a bunch more stuff. It was $80 million last time. I think what staff have put forward here is pretty balanced. And I got to admit, some of the things that I've done, I went, hey, that's pretty negative. They could have, you know, why that's a little bit too negative in the bias. So I think we just kind of read our own biases into these things. You know, there's stuff in there that I would have liked to see. why aren't we highlighting the crime and safety reductions? You know, we have a crisis right now with teenagers addicted to screen time, nowhere to go, not safe out in the neighborhood. This is a rec center that can reduce crime and safety in our community. That's not really being highlighted. Something I'd like to see in there a little bit. That in my opinion, should have been in the. What about healthcare reductions? What's the impact of a facility like this on our healthcare costs? I read an article today from a doctor wrote in, reducing healthcare costs. This is what these kind of pools can reduce pressure on our medical system. That probably should have been in there. But again, this is the complexity of the information. Not that I don't think there's any bias in it. It's just you cannot capture anything. And so I think what staff have done is presented the financial information very clearly. Some things are also, it's hard to tell if it's a pro and a con. I grew up in a farming family in the South Okanagan where every 20 years you cut down the trees and you plant new ones. It's not really seen as a bad thing to cut down a tree and plant better species in a better spot with better tree cells. So removing trees for some people is a crime against humanity. For others, it's a necessary spot of pushing the city forward. So, you know, those type of things are hard to present as pros and cons, and I think staff have done a good job talking about the main cons of this, which is the cost, the tax increase, the trees. They've talked about the benefits as well. So it's very, very subjective. So all in all, I don't believe there is any information that's biased in here. I think we're seeing a lot of folks who might say, hey, I just don't support the pool, and therefore I want to see my view represented more. Or others say, hey, I really want to support it, which I clearly do. I'd like to see more supportive information in there. And staff have done a fairly good job at balancing that. So yeah, at this point, I'm not going to support this motion. I mean, this might have been something to consider 5-6 months ago, but clearly we've already talked about, we gave the direction to move forward on the pool. We gave the direction, I remember it, the default strategy was this, I think it was called the default strategy. It highlighted some benefits for sure. It highlighted the costs associated with that. Yeah, I think, so all in all, maybe this was a good discussion, perhaps unnecessary, I don't know. I don't really care. That's a little bit unfortunate, but I think overall the information provided by staff has been very thoughtfully curated, knowing how complicated it is and understanding that we're never going to have all the information on this type of pool. There's so many unknowns and what ifs. We've hired the best. We have the best staff who have working on this, so I'm happy to move forward, and hopefully it'll be a kind of productive two weeks to let the public decide, and hopefully we can continue getting that information out there to them, both pro and con, however people want to read that. But for today, I'll be voting against this.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Thompson, you have 35 seconds.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with my colleagues that it's good to have this discussion. As I said at the outset, I'm against this motion. And remain so. I think the direction it provides is very vague. It implies that there's a bias in materials. I think it should have been just tweaked to add a little relevant information that most members of the public don't know about and would benefit from, but it wasn't, and so I can't support it in its current form. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Last chance? Very good. Well, I'm very sympathetic to what I believe is behind this, although I never want to impart intent. That being said, I would unfortunately not be able to vote in favor of this for one simple reason. I believe that staff have done the work that council directed them to do. And whatever concerns we may have had, we should have expressed them earlier. And so I think it's just unfortunate that those issues that have been suggested today were not raised at an earlier point so that staff could have been provided with direction in a timely enough way for it to be acted upon. That being said, staff have done a yeoman's job with the direction that they had, and now it's up to us to wait to see what the public says and for us to then consider whatever that outcome might be. And so on that fashion then, I will ask, therefore, all those in favor of this motion? Yes, you have to vote in favor, yes, of your motion. Councillor Hammond, Councillor Gardner. In opposition? Councillor Loughton, Councillor Thompson, myself, Councillor Caradona, Councillor Coleman, Councillor Dell, noting that Councillor Kim is absent. Therefore, this motion is defeated. That would move us on to any items that require closed consideration. As you will have noted that we did have that earlier today. No further items are required to be considered and closed at committee today. And so we will look forward to a motion to adjourn committee. Thank you, Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Hammond, because I saw his hand go up. All those in favor of adjournment? Anyone opposed? That is unanimous. We'll just take a very brief break, and then we will move back into and reconvene our council meeting for daytime. And we have dealt with some of that agenda, and we'll conclude the rest.